Here's looking at you, Pete.
R.I.P.
Chaos Magick developed towards the end of the 20th century and now influences most magical paradigms in this third millennium. Hassani Saba's notorious phrase, echoed by Rabelais, encapsulates it eloquently. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. We should perhaps add the corollary that the consequences can be ghastly if you are not careful with it.
Imagine that there is a brilliant white light just above.
Is commentary on the magic art.
In the years of the primal force and the dawn of terrestrial birth.
Oh, that was very educational.
Now magic will take place. Don't be fooled by what I just said.
Welcome, everyone. I am Superimposed Mathematics Kennedy, and this is Chaos Magick News. The only podcast that, based on how this year is going, will be the only Chaos Magicians left. Joining me, as always, is my prophylactic co-host, Freighter IUD. How you doing, IUD?
So it's called rice magic, right?
Oh, God.
No. So it's called nice magic, right? It's this novel idea. I don't think anyone's ever tried this. What if we all just be really cool to each other?
All right, where's the bad part come in?
I mean, there's nothing bad. I mean, that's crazy. Like that's all you. If you're making this an issue, it's your fault. All I'm trying to do is show everybody some nice magic. How you doing?
I'm good.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm all right. This is not what we were expecting to do. We were supposed to be doing Kenneth Grant Typhonian Trilogies Part 2, weren't we?
Yeah, we were going to talk about Night Side of Eden and Hecate's Fountain and Outside the Circles of Time?
I think you lost one somewhere, but that's not important because the fact is, this is not, in fact, Kenneth Grant Special Part 2. This is we're not going to make it a somber affair, but the reasonings behind it are a far more somber affair, obviously.
Yeah. In the past couple weeks, Chaos Magick lost one of its progenitors. It only felt appropriate, given the circumstances, right in time for us to be doing episode 70. And for all of you who don't listen, every 10 episodes, we take a break from current events and we take breaks from some of the more silly, goofy stuff or talking about occulture. And we just do a sort of a dive into an occultist that we feel is worth exploring and maybe bringing to light. I'm not even sure that's going to be what this is. Because if you're interested in Chaos Magick, how do you not know who Peter Carroll is?
Yeah, what can we tell you that you don't already know about Peter Carroll at this point?
I guess the question really is, who is Peter Carroll?
Well, who is Peter Carroll, co-host?
Peter Carroll is an American football coach. He
served
served
as
head coach.
You didn't. No, stop. We made that joke with Kenneth Grant already.
Okay, all right.
Who's
fine.
Peter Carroll, co-host?
So Peter Carroll is my biological father.
No, we're not.
He said he was going to go get milk.
And he just left. Is it even appropriate that we're still doing that joke now that the man has passed?
I feel it would be inappropriate to try to come at him differently.
Yeah. And that's kind of what this episode's going to be because anyone who has listened to the show before knows that we're pretty big critics of Peter Carroll in a lot of ways.
I feel we strike a healthy balance in appreciating who he was, what he gave occultism, while also saying that what he said wasn't gospel. And that's fair. Unlike a lot of the videos and articles being written, we had no interactions with Peter Carroll.
Not a one.
Life. Not a single one.
We never went around going like, hey, we're a Chaos Magick podcast. Pete, you want to come talk to us?
You want to come talk to us, Mr. Carroll, please?
Yeah, we're not that kind of show. Everyone who's listened to the show before, we're not about fawning over people or asking big names to come talk to us because we think we're really, really got hot shit or we want to get dragged on the coattails of somebody. We were both people incredibly influenced by Peter Carroll from the start of our magical journeys, as it were. Ultimately, what was I going to say to Peter Carroll? Maybe it would have been nice, I guess, but we're not personally acquainted with the man. We weren't personally acquainted with the man. What we know of Peter Carroll mostly comes from the work he put out. And I think in a lot of ways, that might be what Pete wants to be remembered for, far more than any of the personal interactions that he had with occultists, at least. His family and everything and his friends are a different story. That's a completely different subject. But we're not here to talk about Peter Carroll, the man. We're here to talk about Peter Carroll, the thinker. Peter Carroll, the myth, even.
Peter Carroll, the wizard. I'm not sure where, but that became somewhat of a moniker for him, I suppose. His obituary announcement of his death was "The Wizard has gone." So yeah, so this one's for Peter Carroll, the wizard. What can we say about him in terms of his personal life? Or maybe his personal history? Surprisingly little?
Yeah. I'm sure you could do some digging and go find a lot of information that isn't readily available. But again, I'm not interested in dragging that out there. Pete was content to not put his face on things when he talked to people. Pete was content to let his work and the name Peter J. Carroll speak for itself. So I think we should do the same. What we do know about his past is that, well, Peter Carroll,
born in a log cabin.
There we go.
Born in England in 1953. Working class family, I believe. I know in a few interviews mentions travels over to the East, things like that. Obviously had an interest in occultism in the 1970s and the fallout of the flower power movement, but also the occult revival, the period where works of people like Robert Anton Wilson were coming out, and a lot of the renewed interest in things like thelema and ceremonial magic was going on. Carroll and Ray Sherwin congregating around an occult bookstore.
Because where else do you meet spooky people in the 70s?
Yeah, right? You had to actually go out and meet people back then. You couldn't just get on your internet box or look at that damn phone.
Yeah.
Or say grok where to find occultists. There was an occult bookstore. What was it called? The Phoenix?
Yeah, I believe it was called the Phoenix.
I think it was a combination bookstore coffee house or something like that. I believe the interviews where there's that sort of talk where it was a place where people would congregate and not just maybe buy a book or something, but also exchanging of ideas. Carroll and Ray Sherwin start connecting, and both of them having a familiarity with what we currently had, which at the time was what we affectionately refer to as the stuffy-robed traditions.
Yeah.
What hindsight would view as an exceptionally dogmatic and rigid system of magical attainment, and mostly the lodge system of various grades that were meant to be worked through under supervision of a hierarchy. And they weren't satisfied with it, and they began exploring what they saw as the flaws in the systems of how can we improve these. And not only that, but also looking, how do you improve magic? How do you get good, scrub?
And how do you get new ideas into magic?
At the time, Ray Sherwin begins publication of something called the New Equinox, which is obviously a reference to Aleister Crowley's Equinox.
Yeah, the Review of Scientific Illuminism.
It's sort of a zine type of publication. And in 1976, there is the actual first announcement of the Illuminates of Thanateros, the IOT.
You got 76? I got 78.
No. The publication of the...
No, I believe you're right. I believe you're right. Yeah. I have bad information, or I can't take notes properly.
Or we're both wrong. Because we're using the same document. There is an announcement of this group forming, which means that it was probably going on a good bit before that, because you have to have something going. Maybe it was just Pete and Ray were sitting there like, all right, you and me, it'd be the equivalent of me and Kennedy going, all right, occult order, let's go. You can be general, I'm gonna be sergeant. You can be high pontiff in the order, and I'm gonna be low pontiff. You can be the super pontiff and I'll be the mega pontiff.
Well, here,
And anybody else that wants to get involved's got to come take it up with us.
oh God, hang
As
on.
we're sitting in the corner. I can't wait to do all this magic.
Sorry. Okay. So the earliest version of Liber Null was 1978, and it gets reworked and re-released in 81, and then gets again slightly reworked and re-released in 87 as the more popular and widely read Liber Null and Psychonaut.
Also during that time, Sherwin publishes his book of results and Theater of Magic. So between that 3-4 year period, there's these two laying the groundwork, and there are others. Phil Hines shows up, Lionel Snell shows up, a lot of the big names.
Yeah, Ralph Tetmiger. I'm sure that's not how you actually pronounce his name, but Frater UD.
But Tetmeyer.
Oh, it's Tetmeyer? There's a G in it.
But it's German, so the G is silent.
Oh.
Ermine. Erminy.
Erminy.
We're sorry, Liz. Ralphie.
Yeah, Ralphie.
Just call him Ralphie. Oh,
Okay.
boy.
On with it.
The foundations are being laid. Notably, a large German faction forms in this time, too. So there's the UK proper. There's a chunk that happens over in Australia called the Church of Chaos, things like that. If you're interested, there is a book. It's literally called The Book, The Truth, Illuminates of Thanateros that you can find online that will give you a lot of the same information.
What is the Illuminates of Thanateros, they say? You ask. I'm sorry, a lot of this is really just telling you things that you already know, isn't it? I'm sorry, folks, but they referred to themselves as, of course, the spiritual heirs to the Zoski occultists. The Illuminates of Thanateros are drinkers of the dual ecstasies of the sex and death gnosis. The IoT represents a fusion of thelemic magic, tantra, and the sorceries of Zos and Tao. Again, what we were talking about when we said the stuffy robed traditions. Although I guess the Zoski occultists isn't particularly stuffy robed tradition. That's sort of the edge that lets them say, oh no, we're getting into something different.
Yeah, the rest of you are unemployed dandies of the brothel. The IoT starts getting a pretty firm foothold. The books are getting published. The ideas of chaos magic are disseminating out. Primarily the notions of chaos magic being a methodology of results-based magic, relying heavily on ideas of unconscious or subconscious content of the mind influencing reality, taking Spare's ideas about sigils, also proposing ideas of the lack of an essential self, the lack of an essential truth of anything, and that lovely quote of Carroll's, the remarkable uniformity of method with a plurality of symbol systems. And what does that mean? Essentially, that most traditions of magic seem to rely on similar enough grounding that the various representations that are used can be arbitrarily chosen and used to the benefit of the magician, of the practitioner. In the glorious light of the 21st century, that seems very old hat.
Oh, incredibly.
It does, doesn't it? It's like, no, eclectic witchcraft is, it's dime a dozen. It's everybody. Almost, even the people who don't think they're syncretic, the people that don't think they're eclectic are kind of eclectic. The reconstruction of the old ways open to the doors. Thelema and Wicca are, you can make the argument of they at least have a structure to them. But nowadays we look at it, it's like everybody has a certain level of this chaos magic notions about them. We're all folk chaotes, as I've said on the show before. The ideas of intent trumping a lot of the trappings of methodology. The ideas of using whatever works and abandoning the rest. Saying that there is no one proper correct way of magic. At the time, that was a pretty wild notion. That was a pretty radical idea.
Yeah, we see it cropping up elsewhere, but arguably Carroll and the rest of the IoT crew at the time, the rest of the pact, as it were the first people that were, we'll say, occultism proper deciding that this was the move. Of course, we have people like the Discordians, we have Robert Anton Wilson. To a greater or lesser extent, we have Christopher Hyatt, although I think Christopher Hyatt would probably make a lot of arguments against me putting him with that crowd.
Although later in his career, he mentions, I remember there's that interview where they ask him, where's the magic current now? And he says, well, the Chaos Magick people are doing good stuff, things like that. He has a...
Right.
William S. Burroughs was into Chaos Magick. Even the people that sort of came before it saw what was going on. They saw where things were moving, and a lot of them embraced it. And you can always make the argument of, oh, well, these ideas would have come from someone else if they hadn't been there. But they weren't. Who was there? The IoT. So you got to give it to them. You got to give it to them. Time goes on. The pact, as it's referred to, is established. There is an annual meetup that gets established in Austria. It goes on for a couple years, and then because this is an occult order,
oh yeah, you already know what's happening,
happens. And we're not going to get too far into the weeds because this isn't an IoT special. This is a Peter Carroll special.
Yes, it is.
But Sherwin sees what began as an attempt to free magic from a hierarchical structure and a dogmatic approach. And he looks at the IoT and says, we're becoming the thing that we sought to destroy. That despite its very experimental approach, its cry for liberation, its emphasis on a meritocracy, the idea that within the IoT it was supposed to be the people that were able to prove their proficiency were the ones that would rise up. The first little criticism I suppose anyone could lob at is that meritocracy is an awesome idea if it ever worked like that. But I wasn't there. I don't know. But Sherwin himself thought,
this is not working.
This isn't going the way that I expected. And he leaves. And then Carroll and Ralph Tetmeyer have a falling out centered around the 4th annual international meeting, which is affectionately referred to as the Ice War. There are differing accounts of what went down, but suffice to say that it did lead to schisms within the IoT. And the IoT did hold strong. The IoT exists today, just not in North America.
Do we want to explain what the ice magic thing is just a little bit? Because, people want to know.
I think that we will get to the ice magic thing on its own episode. I think we should just we'll do a whole culture piece explaining the different accounts of the ice magic war.
Okay. All right.
And who we think won.
All right, listeners, all of you who are here for just the Peter Carroll episode, you got to come back for a regular episode now so we can tell you about the Ice Magic Wars.
We're baiting you.
But no, we'll just leave it at that. There's a split. There's a lot of different stories about how it worked.
Who said what? Who left what in a freezer? Who?
But there was a falling out between the two of them. Freighter UD takes his crowd of people and the IoT splits, but it's still an organization. It's still an organization to this day, not for lack of trying.
Yeah. Carroll, notably not long after the schism, also looks around and decides, well, I've had enough of this.
Yeah, I was told that it's shortly after Liber Chaos is published.
That would be his 3rd book. In my head, I think of it as the 2nd book because it's Liber Null and Psychonaut published together, then Liber Chaos. But it's the 3rd book. So shortly after that, he leaves. But notably, he doesn't publicly announce that he left. People that were in the group knew, and I'm sure it got around, but he never makes a comment on it till years later. And we're at 1990 by the time the Ice Wars happen. And I think it's 2002 or somewhere around there where he actually says that he left.
He allegedly stayed on pretty good terms with most of the people. He doesn't go around like bad mouthing the IoT after this.
No, he doesn't.
Contrary to what you would expect when people leave occult orders, especially these days. But
well, I think it also says a lot about Carroll at least in terms of his work and his presence that you could say that he had in terms of online, the internet is starting to take its centerpiece as the information hub of the end of the 20th century, early 21st century. He doesn't go around bad-mouthing a lot of people. He doesn't go around saying, oh, well, the IoT sucks now and it's all bad.
He doesn't go around immediately trying to start his own occult order to compete with them either.
No. I'm sure he, in a way, he was probably still quite proud of what he had helped put together and the current that he established, and why drag it down with the drama? Instead, he kept letting his work speak for itself. We have some people that we rub elbows with that were known associates that might have a different take. He's like, Carroll was, it's like, oh man, but if you gave him a whiskey, he'd let you know. But as we move on from there, he's now taken his graceful exit from the IoT, but he is still, hate to say it like this, and people can decry it all they want, he's still the guy. He's still the man when it comes to Chaos Magick. You say Chaos Magick, you think Carroll.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
There's not a single person more associated with this current than Peter Carroll. He is very much the foundation of it. And again, Ray Sherwin, very important.
Phil Hine, very important.
You know, Frater UD, Lionel
Frater
Snell.
UD.
These people are important. They mean a lot, but ultimately, you can't talk about Chaos Magick without talking about Peter Carroll. He is that guy. He is literally him.
And I'm sure that will only become exacerbated in death.
Yeah.
The wizard shall take on his mythic quality.
Yeah.
He's now somebody that you can bother on the astral realm.
Oh, God. How many people do you think have already tried to contact Pete? He's like, I've been dead for like 2 weeks. Jesus. I don't even get a day off.
Let me get settled. Shit. I need help with my math homework.
We could continue reading you the riot act of what Peter Carroll did after he left the IoT. But more importantly, I think the work that he put out is what we want to talk about. So maybe we should move on to that.
Yeah, getting into the broad strokes of what did Peter Carroll really, what did he give us in terms of his work? What did he write? What were the ideas that he thought were so damn important that he had to put them on paper and take them to a publisher and say, listen here, you dirty motherfucker, magic is fucked. I'm gonna fix it.
We can't start anywhere but talking about the big two, right? Liber Null and Psychonaut.
Of course.
We could spend an entire episode on this.
We could spend multiple episodes on this.
And in fact, you know what, we will. Listeners, just to plug us shamefully right here in the beginning, on Patreon, before Pete died, we started doing this before Pete died. We're not that big of opportunists. We decided we were going to start doing a read-through of Liber Null and Psychonaut.
A sort of revisiting of longtime coyotes, and we got friend of the show, Rebel Sandpaper, who has never read it, despite being a coyote. We got her to sit down with us and read through the first chapter, and we're going to get people of various familiarities to step in and sit down and discuss different chapters and sections of the book. It's a good one. But if you don't have time for all of that, Liber Null and Psychonaut is the foundational text that essentially amount to the marching papers for membership in the IoT, at least in the early days. It was a syllabus. It laid out a series of practices that one should take if you were seeking the various rankings of the neophyte and the adept and all of that.
It is the start of what we will see develop over the course of all of Peter Carroll's works, I think, because things that he talks about in the very last major occult work that he published, Epoch, the Esotericon and Portals of Chaos, things that he brings up in virtually everything he talks about from there are laid out in here. They are taken with again, a sort of mythic quality at first. This is the building of and the development of the occult world of Peter Carroll, and he presents it as the lineage of the IoT. He presents it as the development of occultism from where Carroll sees its starting point in what he perhaps controversially calls shamanism, all the way through Tantra, Gnosticism, the Knights Templar, Hermeticism, Freemasonry, Aleister Crowley himself, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and then into the IoT.
It bears repeating, because I know we've said it before in the very early episodes of Chaos Magick News. Carroll, and by extension the IoT, mostly come from people that were very familiar with the established Western tradition. I'm sure that they saw what they were doing as revolutionary, but they also saw it as a continuation, as the logical extension of where we were to where we're going, which I think maybe is lost on coyotes today. You know, if you're a Chaos Magick person, if you're a spooky woo-woo who got into it from finding your stolen PDF of Liber Null, if you got into it from finding somebody doing a Sigil 101 video, if you got into the practices of magic the way that most of us do at this point, it might be lost that these were people that They had read Levy, they had read Crowley, they read Dion Fortune and Blavatsky and all of those people that now kind of get thrown about and say, you don't need all this crap. You need to go jerk off to a squiggle.
These were people that were well acquainted with the Western tradition and, you know, some of the Eastern tradition, but these were serious students of occultism, and especially in the contemporary age where perhaps spuriously, chaos magicians often get labeled as goofy, no rules following, I ain't got no book learning, check out my Little Pony servitor kind of people. Man, even the My Little Pony servitor thing is dated, isn't it? We're old.
It is, yeah. Can't say a Mr. Meekseeks box, Rick and Morty, that's dated. I don't know what the...
What are kids into now? Hell of a Boss?
My Bluey servitor.
But we have the reputation for being people that do
clowns.
not... Yeah, clowns. Being goofy. Being people
like
that...
us.
Yeah, like us. Gibbering yahoos. How many jokes have we made about football players already?
But genuinely, it does come out of a place of studiousness, and even Carroll's work reflects, even the early work where he is, hate to say it, but he's using stuff that they got from Carlos Castaneda books. He talks about the right way of walking.
Oh, right.
Which I can always loop around and say, if you have a practice and it does something, then who cares if someone made it up? Who cares if you got it from a TV show? It's about what are the actual results? What are you doing? But it's very easy to see the clownery of it, or the ha-has, you know, even in Liber Null where he makes talk about the Dimmock from Count Dante.
Yeah, the death touch, the poison hands of the world's most deadliest martial artist. What's the joke we always make? The drop kicking your the soul out of your baby so you can reincarnate into it.
Yeah, those are things that are in Liber Null, and it's a little silly. There's parts of it that are, but it's trying to lay the foundations with a very wide net of seeing everything that was available, everything that was talked about, and trying to understand in what ways all of these things can be made to link up in a certain way that is a functional, revolutionary look at magic. It comes down to three big things, two of which I've already mentioned. One, Austin Osman Spare's framework of the unconscious mind and its effects on the material world, and that magic is a means of tapping into this unconscious force that is able to project its will outward. That is what he deems gnosis, achieving a void state or an ecstatic fever pitch where the conscious operating system of the human, namely the human mind, can be suspended long enough that the will of the practitioner is able to be pushed out into the world through what he deems a system of etheric projection, where the mind is able to, through this medium, affect the material world. That's the first big one. The second big one is the abandoning of fixed notions of the self, the idea that this conscious mind, this conscious forefront ego is only one facet of the mind, of the personality of the human being, and that there is actually a plethora of various drives and complexes and operating systems that are all functioning semi-autonomously in the human being, and that through the process of magnifying one and subduing the others and seeing the ways in which they interplay, you can find various means through which the human psyche is able to interact or experience different phenomena. He equates the god forms. He mentions in Liber Null a quote of a pantheon of gods is equivalent to a psychocosm, that the god forms are archetypal symbols of facets of human nature. And then thirdly, taking that same abandonment of fixed views of the self and applying that to truth. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Belief is a tool. Putting forward the idea that any hypothesis, any belief is provisional, conditional, and arbitrary, and that the proper use of that can allow one to liberate themselves from conditioned states, from the programming that happens to all of us as we go through life. And once you're able to deliberately choose what your beliefs are and how you interact with them and how you behave, that too will open the door for liberation and change of the universe that the practitioner experiences.
The idea that beliefs themselves are meaningless beyond their utility.
That's a good way of putting it.
Probably the one that has carried itself far beyond Carroll into not only the modern age, but again, into the sort of folk chaotic perspective that we see in a lot of practitioners now. There seems to be, if not as clearly defined as it is in Carroll, a sort of sentiment that your ability to engage with these practices, these ideas, is influenced heavily by what you are choosing to believe, your commitment. He says it later, but the fake it till you make it mentality of Chaos Magick, where any sort of belief you have, you can just choose it, just pick it, and then act as if it's true. And eventually, not only will it be true, but then you'll be able to decide whether or not it's really working for you and choose new ones.
Liber Null and Psychonaut has the infamous dice roll exercise where you roll a dice and each number corresponds to a different belief system of monotheism, polytheism, superstition, a sort of illuminated Taoism that shows up. That's like basically different iterations of the broad strokes of beliefs, and it tells you to roll the dice and then simply act as such for a period of time.
Unfortunately, a lot of folks have just kind of stopped there with Chaos Magick.
Yeah, and if we're gonna, and I think a lot of the critiques that are thrown at Chaos Magick, especially nowadays, can come down to people not having a very firm grasp of the perhaps philosophical backdrop from which Carroll is saying all of these things. I think we said it when we did the response to Dot Darling's video. You can always take the worst version of a particular system or tradition, or just, find the worst version of a person who has an idea that you don't like and then argue against them rather than a good faith argument of really trying to see where they're coming from.
Right.
And I think that's what a lot of this comes down. Now there are definitely critiques to make of Carroll. There's a lot of critiques that you could make about the ideas of belief as a tool and such like that. And we've made them.
Yeah, we have. We will probably make them later, too, in the wrap-up.
But we're coming from it as somebody... we're coming from this as people who took these ideas very seriously and worked with them and tried to understand where they were coming from and did a lot of looking in... perhaps more scholarly pursuits, looking at looking at philosophy outside of occultism, looking at neurology and things like the psychology, the various different sciences that exist outside of the occult sphere, and then coming back and looking at this. If you read Liber Null and your takeaway was just, if I believe something, it's going to be true. You didn't really read it.
Yeah.
It's not fair to say that.
It's the raw quote about people coming to him and having to ask him about what true will means. He's like, well, there's only one reason that they would have to ask me that. It's because they didn't do any of the stuff I told them to do in the book.
Yeah, they just read the book and didn't follow any of the exercises. So now they just think that if I read the book, it's going to make the thing happen.
Yeah. What are the other big things that are sort of laid out here? Probably the most notable is the heavy elaboration and systemization of the previously mentioned Zolski occultus, right? Peter Carroll takes many of the elusive and impenetrable ideas of Austin Osman Spare and, in my opinion, so no one come at me about this, kind of plays with them and twists them and makes them into something that he can work with a little better. I don't think that Carroll's ideas on Kia and Chaos are a one-to-one for Austin Osman Spare. I don't think that's super controversial, but
I think it's notable that outside of Liber Null and Psychonaut, the idea of Kia doesn't get brought up nearly as much. He tends to start falling back just on the concept of the mind.
Right. He talks explicitly more about the mind, and in other works he gets a little more I'll say it, he gets a little more pragmatic on it and discusses that the dualities of mind and matter are really just linguistic conventions and metaphysics, and he's like, well, we're not going to even deal with that, we're going to deal with the phenomena. You know, Carroll's a good pragmatist when he wants to be, in my mind.
We could go through a lot of things of like that are mentioned in Liber Null. Like he talks about the Holy Guardian Angel, which to this day is still held by even some Coyote people as that's like, oh yeah, that's like a super real thing. I'll tell you this, as I'm a Coyote and having done like HGA workings and stuff and got what one could construe as knowledge and conversation, I don't think it's any more real than any of the other stuff you do. There's no true will out there in the universe, in the ether, that, you know, outside of reality or the conventional reality we understand. It's just a thing. It's another practice that you can do to get a thing that exposes itself in this sort of way. But coming from the Western tradition, coming out of a particular historical movement, of course he mentions it.
Yeah, I think that's the point I wanted to make about Liber Null before we move on to Psychonaut, is so much of it is not Carroll. So much of it is this long storied tradition of the West, of Western occultism, being laid out in this new vernacular, in this new vocabulary, in this, well, here are the big ideas I have. Let me show you what it means for everything else. When Peter Carroll talks about banishing very early in the book, he is saying it as someone who has done the LBRP, done the Star Ruby, done all of these sorts of vanishing rituals, what we all kind of conceptualize now as a banishing ritual, your quarters call stuff. The idea of setting a barrier and putting yourself into the center of a magical world, these sorts of things, this is all stuff that existed before, but has now been correlated and brought together under this sort of remarkable uniformity of method idea that Carroll has. Same thing with his thoughts on evocation. Same thing as his thoughts on aeonics, as it were. There's this greater tradition that he's seeing that he's now trying to describe from the unique perspective that Chaos Magick was starting to develop.
I don't even want to dwell on Psychonaut too much because in my mind the two books do bleed together because I've only read them as a combined work.
Yeah, as the two-pack.
Yeah, the two-pack. The double feature, the double header. Psychonaut has the notable Mass of Chaos and the ideas about Baphomet as the symbolic collective life force of the planet. Baphomet being this figure that is seeking to resolve the contradictions where it has the female parts but the male the female breast but the male phallus. It has a body of a man but also a head of a beast. It has wings. And he takes that as it's symbolic like that because it is attempting to be representative of a collective life force, of representing everything on the planet that we would consider living. Even makes a mention of if robots were to become sufficiently conscious, or whatever word, that it would have to take on qualities of machinery, which I think is kind of neat to say that in the 70s. And it's all very sci-fi.
To say it in 2026 just makes you groan, though.
Just makes me want to slap that shit. It's like, get that slop
Get
out
that
of me.
chat GPT out of my Baphomet.
No clankers in the live stream.
Not to expand too far ahead of this, but again, this is an idea that Carroll will carry with him for the rest of his work. This is something that, again, in his last major published work, he's still talking about. And this isn't a criticism so much as just trying to make a point that that's a highly spooky metaphysical kind of idea. Even as an analogy, it sort of is. And for a lot of us in contemporary chaos magic, we see that as just another idea to have. And great.
If you can use it, you can use it.
So much of what Carroll does going forward, in my mind, and you might not agree with me on this, co-host, is starting us on the path that we can all tread as we will. The steep incline ramp with no guards.
Right.
And we get to see Carroll's progression on that incline.
Parting thoughts on that. It's interesting because this first foray is very much a scattershot. It's a wide net. He talks about crystals and how their structure is good for catching ghosts. He talks about possession and how the psychological complex of a neuroses or something is akin to a possession that can be cast out the same way that you would a demon, things like that. Oh, he mentions how much he hates astrology, but also talks about divination. He offers a new interpretation of astrology that seems to be just based on the moon phase and the sun. It says the interactions of the strongest gravitational celestial body and the nearest one have some kind of interaction that you could probably cobble a new kind of astrology. And I don't think he ever really goes far with that, but it showed certain levels of his bias, but also showing that he knew he had to say something about it. It's like, I gotta say something.
Oh yeah, I mean every magical topic you can think of is touched on in some capacity. Maybe not in a way you approve of, but it's touched on in some capacity.
It's a while, because 87 is when Liber Null and Psychonaut is published as the combined work.
Right.
92 is his second book, Liber Chaos. That's 7 years later. That is a long time to go without a publication.
Well, and in a way, it's the first book that's not just an IoT sort of thing, because again, Liber Null is the training text for the IoT, essentially, at least at the time. And Psychonaut, while expanding on that, it still gets grouped with it. But Liber Chaos is the first one that he's a little farther from it at this point.
He's had time to sort of find himself, find more of Carroll's ideas rather than trying to make everything mesh with what he was on about. I feel like Liber Chaos is kind of almost the forgotten child. It doesn't get talked about I feel like it doesn't get talked about nearly as much.
No, it really doesn't. And that's a shame, because I think it might be his best one.
Really?
Yeah, in a way, partly because it's so short. I mean, it's not ludicrously than the rest of his books, but I feel like, if anything, this is the one where he starts giving you some practical ideas outside of quite such a chaotic sort of approach. It's a lot more targeted, maybe. I don't know.
Carroll does mention this book as the idea of something to the effect of if all of the knowledge of magic got lost all of a sudden, and there was a book you needed that was going to try to just get you back on track and try to reclaim what was available, or this is the things you really need to know about doing magic. That's what this book is. That, at least if I remember, that's how he kind of describes it. There is some very interesting stuff. This is when the phrase sleight of mind comes up, which is, I think, that's probably one of the more useful terms or useful framings when we talk about the idea of magic needing to operate on an unconscious level. The idea that you are doing, you're doing these rituals, but there is a goal that these rituals are in some way supposed to be occupying you so that the will is able to act freely away from all of your bullshit. Liber Null does explain how sigils are supposed to work and how magic is supposed to, the idea of you should forget the intent of the sigil, or if you're dwelling on it, you should blight it from your head and things like that. Methods, the idea of if every time a desire comes up, think on this sigil instead and sort of sacrifice the desire to the sigil, things of that nature. But when he gets to sleight of mind, the example that he uses of getting like stones and naming them after your enemies and knocking them about. Which is a very like easy sympathetic magic sort of idea, if maybe a little goofy, because I'm picturing like a proper Englishman with like pedals and he's going, fuck you, Ralphie. He says, yeah, that's like, you should do this. This is this is the ritual, as it were. It's not that you shouldn't do it, but you should operate it in a way that you sort of lose yourself in the ritual, so that what you're actually trying to do slips past your brain and goes into the aethers and is projected out. That's just one example, but I think there's something interesting to that. I gave this talk when we were having a get together with the Discord peeps, where I talked about magic or ritual as a means of just laying it all out on the field, so that whatever you're going after, you're able to just drop it and walk away after the ritual. And I think there's an element of that there that is incredibly useful.
I agree. This is not the first place, because he does talk about it in Liber Null and Psychonaut, and maybe a bit more in Psychonaut, but this is really where the quantum mechanics love for Carroll really pops out too. Because he's already on it immediately.
I was going to try to say all the things I liked about this book before I got there.
Oh, okay. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. This is where a lot of our critiques of Carroll, and a lot of anybody's critiques of Carroll, start to come up in his love of quantum mechanics. Carroll, as he goes on, goes harder and harder into quantum mechanics and speculative science for explanations for how and why magic works.
Yeah, and his choice of doing so is overwhelmingly equations.
Yeah, putting equations in the middle of books.
Actual math. Well, no, in fact, I don't even want to say it's actual math, because a lot of it is nonsense.
It's got letters in it. How am I supposed to do this?
But as someone that reads Lacan and other fucking heavy bullshit, I'm not opposed to getting some equations and formulas in my weird wiggy ideas, but yeah, overwhelmingly, the longer he goes on this, you start to feel a lot more like you're reading a paper on quantum mechanics and someone's philosophical musings about quantum mechanics, rather than getting a magic book.
Let's say it like this, rather than presenting useful pragmatic approaches of things you can do with magic, like the sleight of mind example, or the colors of magic that show up in this.
Right, the retroactive enchantment ideas. That's probably the one place where his quantum mechanics spookery talk kind of works, because it's like, well, we can explain quantum mechanics and how, cause and effect don't really work. So that means you could do magic for stuff that already happened. And that's a useful idea, at least if you can get something good out of it.
But,
and a big butt.
A big butt. A big Schrodinger's butt. I often feel like what Carroll puts out, especially these ideas of chaos theory and quantum mechanics, is this notion that reality is this big soup that until you look at it, until your subjective mind can grasp something, everything is just kind of up in the air. And if that opens the door for you, if that's the framework you need so that you don't feel like a goober doing this stuff, I can't fault you. I just don't find it very useful, and for me it's off-putting, because I don't need all of that. Once you're already on the train of like magic is real, I think one of the most beneficial things you can do is just take all of your metaphysics out back and shoot it.
Yeah. And here's my issue, I would say, and I was going to save this till a little later, but we're talking about it now, so maybe I'll point at it and say, this is the part that made me think this later. I think Carroll thinks that he's doing away with all the metaphysical ideas. Or
By
at
getting
least
a
not any of the
scientific-
ones that he can't point to with the same sort of rational, scientific, materialist, or scientific worldview that predominates in that period. He tends to just turn quantum mechanics into his area of, his platonic realm of ideas, his astral field, all of that sort of stuff. Everything that you would normally have to point to and say, this is my big spooky thing for how magic works, he can kind of ply into quantum mechanics in some sort of way. And it reminds me of Christopher Hyatt talking about Timothy Leary. We've said this paraphrase before, but you have to be careful with people like that because he can mix his facts and his metaphors.
Yeah. Again, if you get something useful out of it, if reading the math equations of magic plus mana plus gnosis equals fireball, like if that actually helped you, it takes a certain type of individual to look at that and get something good out of it. And I think in a way, Carroll was definitely one of those people, but I think he in his mind, he thought he was writing for those people. He was writing for the scientific rationalist methodology type folks who needed some kind of exposition on how these things worked. Ironically, to the detriment of where Chaos Magick kind of starts in the idea of beliefs are only as useful as their utility, and even acknowledging that they're arbitrary and provisional. To me, I think if you're able to work with various practices of different paradigms, as he would call them, if you're able to work in them earnestly and get a feel for what, if I do this practice, these kinds of things happen, you don't need nearly as many whys as we think we do.
Yeah.
You can just accept them as they are.
Tell you what, here, I'm going to read this quote from Liber Chaos, and you can kind of understand what I'm talking about here. Chaos cannot be perceived or willed directly. Its existence is inferred from two phenomena. Firstly, the existence of matter, and secondly, the random behavior of matter. The ether of shadow time is similarly inferred from the two phenomena. First, the reality of magic, and second, the stochastic behavior of matter. The stochastic behavior of matter is reflected in its tendency to replicate form developed on a random basis. Matter can be conveniently divided for descriptive purposes into space, time, mass, and energy. However, we can only describe any one of these phenomena in terms of the other three. Any definitions we care to make about matter are thus tautological. This, for example, is the reason that we know what time is until we try to think about it. Time is relative movement. It can only be described or defined in terms of space, mass, and energy. These things, in turn, can only be defined in a similar way, and we find that we cannot know what they are in themselves either. Other sentient races might conceivably have a quite different tautology based on dividing matter into a different number of parts. However, this consensus description on this world is at least conveniently represented by the tetrahedron. And we're going to stop right there because how much of that was necessary? I would argue none of it.
Now, what's weird is that he gets at something very useful there. He gets at something very, at least maybe interesting, and that he says, another sentient race might divide the world up in a completely different manner. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. So what that means is that the means by which we make sense of this phenomena seems reliant on our tools and our methods of dealing with them. We develop means of measuring time, matter, means of dealing with time, of understanding the passage of time. We understand how matter works. If I slap my hand on this desk, it's going to probably hurt my hand. It's going to make a loud noise, those sorts of things.
We have an understanding of space, and energy, I think, is the one where he gets a little more sciencey with it, because I don't know if we have like a primordial phenomenological kind of understanding of energy, as it were.
Well, energy does the problem is that energy can mean a lot of different things. Energy is a word that gets bandied about in a lot of occult circles to mean like woo-woo. That's what it.
And more importantly for here, because he's talking about the building blocks of reality, as it were, space, time, matter, energy. What he touches on that's really good in our minds, at least as the neo-chaotic pragmatist, he's simply pointing out that it is the pragmatic breakdown of reality, the way that humans and how we interact and conceive of things sort of breaks it down in these ways, and a different race could do it in a completely different manner. We would probably make the argument that people can do it in different manners historically throughout time and so on and so forth, but that's another problem. Point being is that a lot of that was not necessary to what he's about to tell you to do practically with any of this information.
It's very much Carroll being of two minds, where he is very much able to tell you how to do magic. Go sit here, do this, become motionless, become still, stop your thoughts, induce a trance. Here are practical, like when I say practical, I mean hands-on things that you do. Like, here is a ritual. Here's how to do a type of ritual like this. Or even saying more subtle things of like, if you were trying to invoke a god form, you would find the personal or cultural, psychological associations of that god form and use them in a way that can induce this state in you. That's a very practical one. But then he starts talking about quantum mechanics and how there's shadow time.
Let me explain why the pentagram is the most simple diagram of the universe. And it's like, is any of this necessary?
And I think for Carroll it absolutely is, because he keeps working in these, trying to find a why. And I think in the questioning and his sort of scientific, in quotes, approach, he might be getting something out of it. It's surely that's where the rest of his work comes from, is battling with these ideas. But I think in terms of what Chaos Magick as it was laid out, not just by him, but by the rest of the IoT, is honestly a bit closer to the hands-on do this, the Crowley certain acts produce certain results. The student is earnestly warned against ascribing objective reality or philosophical validity.
And while I will say that I think Carroll, again, is very willing to say, oh yeah, no, this is none of this you shouldn't attribute any sort of real value to any of this stuff. This is all utility. When we get to the Octavo, I'll throw the quote out to tell you exactly why Carroll's continuing on this quantum mechanics binge, even though the neo-chaotic pragmatist CMN boys are like, that's really stupid and you probably don't even need any of it. Carroll thinks that this has the most utility. And while we disagree, I can't say it's because he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. None of these critiques come from saying, oh, Carroll sucks and you shouldn't listen to him. That's one of those things I fear when we talk about this, because it's the thing of, the man just died. We're doing a special. A lot of the people listening to this are presumably people that like Carroll. We are not trying to just simply bag on this man, but it would be dishonest of us to say, oh, well, we're not going to bring up any of our criticisms of the work.
Yeah.
Now, the other good things in Liber Chaos, the colors of magic, again, an arbitrary system, admittedly, but it ascribes these different colors and says this type of color it is representative of this sort of magic. That actually gets a very similar rendition in one of I believe the end of Night's Side of Eden by Kenneth Grant, where he does colors and planetary associations, and then ascribing like orange is mercurial, which deal, sort of writing communication, red obviously being the, martial and warlike, and blue being Jupiterian and related to wealth, and green being Venus dealing with love, yellow being solar consciousness, and on and on and on. And the various ways in which that this sort of 8-color system might lend itself to a practical. It's giving you a grid that you can slap on in the same way that maybe Liber 777 gave you the associations. Like, if I want to know, hey, if I want to do a Jupiterian ritual, let me look at this, and this, and like this culture has this stand-in and it's got this symbol associated with it, and this is the type of incense I burn. And that's useful. There's nothing wrong with that.
Especially when you're starting out and you don't quite know what you're doing, as far as just saying, all right, well, I can do anything, so let me do anything. It's a fertile ground for somebody learning magic to approach this in. And I think that is really good.
He also gives us the exercise of chaos monasticism, where you carry around a walking stick or a staff, a wand of some kind, and he gives you a practice of observances, a sort of rigorous self-discipline to get yourself in a magical state that I think is fun. I think it's a useful one.
Well, we tried it out on the show. He expanded chaos monasticism into the 4 different elemental weapons that we see in the sort of Golden Dawn tradition, and we put them to the test, and it was mixed results, but it was an interesting experience.
Yeah, but he gives you another thing to do, and then finally it ends with Liber KKK, which is an unfortunate name. It was 92, man. How did you not know that, Pete? I get that you're not American, but the Soviets knew about the KKK. They were using them for propaganda. How did you not know, brother? Man, I live in the South. How I had to
tell people I was something else.
K3. Say K3. And they're like, you're climbing a mountain? No.
But Liber KKK is very near and dear to your heart because I believe either shortly before the show started or during the show's early years.
Yeah, when Chaos Magick News started, I had gone back to Liber KKK. I had gone through it once where I gave myself the white ribbon of, well, you made it through, and I don't think I did really a great job, but I did it because I was trying. But what it is Carroll, always the teacher, I suppose, laying out like a coursework of like, here are 5 different approaches to magic. And here are the 5 kinds of magic.
Yeah, and again, because I keep pointing it out, an idea that Carroll will carry with him through the rest of his work, because he's still talking about this.
Well, and this is what he means by the uniformity of method, where it's like, all right, it's enchantment, it's divination, it's invocation, it's evocation, it's illumination. Those are the 5. Every kind of act of magic that you can do is going to fit into one of these 5, basically, more or less. Sometimes there's things that cross over, like they're kind of both. Sometimes you're invoking so that you can get a divination or something like that. But he's like, more or less, they all sort of fit there. And he gives you this coursework of like, work through all of these. And it wasn't that long ago that I finished it, where, it took me, it took me, what, 3 years? We've been doing the show for about 3 years?
Going on 4, so about 3 when you finished it, yeah.
Yeah, granted, and granted, my shame on me, what I did was that sometimes things would strike my interest, and I'd be like, let me put a pause on this, because I had to do Minnesota voodoo or something. But I worked through it, and I got through. The problem is I hit that wall of high magic, and was like, God, I have to figure out what that even really means.
Oh, man. Hey, do we want to read the high magic part just so we can give the listener an idea of what the hell we're talking about?
That would be a great quote. Listen to this.
High magic is that which occurs when there is no impediment to the direct magical effect of will, no barrier to the direct clairvoyance and prescience, and no separation between the magician and any form of rapport or consciousness he or she chooses to enter into. For most people, the portals of high magic open at a few peak moments in a lifetime. As the magician progresses through the training, the momentum he or she acquires will force open the gates to the miraculous more often. No procedures are given here for the 5 conjurations of high magic. High magic represents the point where technique gives way to intuitive genius, and each magician must intuit the key to unleashing such powers. So basically, just do it. You'll figure it out. You'll figure it out.
You'll know it. You'll know it when you see it. I mean, and there is something to be said about that. Often Carroll's work has spoken of things such as empty-handed magic, or when the magician works with no symbol system save reality itself. And I think it requires a certain level of altered perspective and a certain level of working out what that looks like when there's no one to point at anything. It almost turns into these Zen problems where they're pointing at the moon and you're looking at the finger, or you're looking at the finger and, you're saying, hey, you bastard, what the hell, what's your problem? And then they smack you in the head. But getting to that point, is a rewarding thing. It's Gordon White, who also recently passed away, on his Rune Soup blog. I don't even remember what the blog post was, but he talked about, it was 3 different things where it's like, if you ever really just want to completely shake off this materialism worldview that you're stuck with, if you really want to just get yourself become a magician with no going back, here's a couple things you can do. And one of the things he said was do the Liber KKK course. And I was already there, I hate to say it, I'm just going to be a spooky woo-woo till I die. But there is something very rewarding about working through that and getting to those points where you do see that magic isn't necessarily beholden to what you can crib and modify from some ancient tradition that goes all the way back to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Like I said, Liber Chaos. If somebody wanted to get into Chaos Magic, I think I'd still tell them to read Liber Null, but I would tell them to read Liber Chaos afterwards.
I think I would at least tell them to do Liber KKK, because I think that is a better place to get through the magical world, to break on through to the other side, than going through the syllabus of Liber Null, as it were. That's just my personal opinion. That's a lot of why I think Liber Chaos is maybe his best book, is because I think the quantum mechanics stuff, as a first-time reader, as someone who is coming into this with a whole lot of the materialist kind of scientific worldview of the 21st century hanging over your head, I think that there's a lot of power into the way he presents his arguments, that even if you can kind of see through it and be like, I think this guy's a little full of shit, it touches you enough that you can at least get into the mindset and take seriously the sort of farther out ideas he's presenting. So when you finish reading all of that and you're buzzing because you read a wacky book with wacky ideas, and you get to the appendice and you see, he's given me like a whole course here. I think that's something that could do a lot of good. I think that's why I want to hang my hat on that one.
What I'll say? You should read Liber Null and Psychonaut. You should do the stuff that he tells you to do in Liber K.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. His next book is Psybermagick, Advanced Ideas in Chaos Magic.
I will say that this is, without a doubt, my favorite work by Peter Carroll.
Really? That's your favorite? It's the cover, right? No. Folks, no, we got to take a minute to talk about this, because here's the thing, right? We're coming from a world where the cover of Liber Null is iconic.
Yeah, I have it tattooed on me. I think I've said that before.
What's the name of the
Brian
artist?
Ward.
Yeah, the amazing Brian Ward.
The enigmatic.
Had a dream that he lost an eye in France and no one saw him again.
Yeah, he was something else. He was really, but it's
amazing art. Amazing art. Liber Chaos, I don't remember the cover of Liber Chaos. It's just sort of a
swarmy, vaguely body shaped, and it's okay. It's not bad.
But man, the cover for Cybermagic.
There's like a giant moon with a chaos star, and then like a luchador mask in the center.
Yeah, it's like a luchador mask over the chaos star, and then like in the back is like a bunch of motherboards and like shitty computers from the 90s, and what I think is like fucking shadow cabinet.
Yeah. but it's this, I can only assume that the luchador head is Peter Carroll's Eidolon. This is the magic all-purpose servitor that followed him around like a JoJo stand.
No, this is Peter Carroll's other career as a luchador.
That's why he was so secretive.
El Chaoso.
I genuinely love this book. I really do. This is one of my favorite. This book does not have a real coherence. This is not a book that is about giving you the structure to do magic. This is not about introducing you into the Illuminates of Thanateros. This is not a book that is about any singular thing. What it is about is Peter Carroll just letting loose with all of the ideas that he had in 1996.
It's in fact here's the chapter 1 Cybermagick introduction, an introduction to the Ipsissimus thesis of Frater's
Stochasticus, which was his name in the order.
Abandoning conventional literary format, we present a terse and abrupt catalog of notes, observations, provocations, spells, and rituals to challenge any aspiring magus with the wit and the daring to play with them. And that is 100% what it is. This is one of those books that you don't have to read in order in any sort of way.
You can jump anywhere.
Just pick a random number. You got 60 chapters. Just pick one.
And they're all relatively short. And you can just go through, and he goes on everything. He talks about concept of the eidolon, of like create a servitor that is just sort of all-purpose and build him up in your mind through a visualization and imagination and this, that, and the other. He talks about the ideas of immortality and why it's actually probably not a good idea. He attacks the notions of democracy and says we might be better off just drawing names out of a hat, which I think he might be onto something because I read the news and then I got to come on a show and talk about it. I'm thinking, shit, Petey, where's the hat?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
He attacks the goobers that are in occult orders. He attacks the idea of conspiracy and then says, but conspiracies are actually really cool. Do you want to be part of one?
He gives random predictions about stuff. He does it so in a way that the familiar Thelemic listener will understand. It's clearly inspired by the Book of Lies by Aleister Crowley.
Absolutely.
It is mentioned in the introduction, but each chapter is, usually about a page, and then next to it is a little commentary where he further expands on it. And you need him to expand on some of it because some of them are really fucking short. Some of them are essentially like a Doonesbury comic worth of text, maybe. Hang on. Let's look at this. Heresy 1, Chapter 20. Spirituality. Magic will not free itself from occultism until we have strangled the last astrologer with the guts of the last spiritual master. After decades of mounting anger at prevailing fashions and stupidity, we present something to offend everyone in the following heresy chapters. Never discard the negative roots of any equation. Always look at the dark side of any enlightenment. And then he gives a commentary on just that. Language alone makes religion possible. The nonsense equation 2 + 2 = 5 has the effect of a virus which will undo the entire edifice of mathematics if left uncorrected. The false linguistic equations underlying paradigms of spirituality have a similar effect on thought. And then because you guys know us by now, even if you're a new listener, you've figured it out. What we like is you to tell us to do stuff, and then we'll decide if it's any good. He gives a little exercise. Identify the erroneous linguistic equations which create the following ideas. The supreme being, higher things, spiritual values. He tells you right there. I understand why you think this might be the best one. It's definitely the most fun one.
Let me give you another one. Heresy 6, dropping the wand. Does the power of the way you live cause magic to occur effortlessly? Do you use true will as an excuse to do nothing? Do you think that even when things apparently go badly for you, your inborn spiritual wisdom and power have arranged an initiation for you despite your conscious desire? Parentheses, they may well have. But how do you choose to interpret the message? Do you no longer need your instruments and the technical procedures of spells and servitors? Have you declared yourself enlightened? Commentary. Damn your weak philosophies, a pox and a pestilence upon your despicable sloth and arrogance. Either give up now, tear off the adept stripes you once won and join the New Agers, or pick up that wand and let's see half a dozen tight sigils launched with full gnosis before dawn. That's something that you should just throw at people whenever they... It's like he knew. He was talking to people. One thing you can say about Carroll, too, is that he seemed very open to correspondence with just about anybody that would bother him. And he probably suffered a lot of nuts and a lot of people that he couldn't stand.
Yeah, you're right. Now I almost feel bad for never reaching out to him.
There's one, I won't even read the whole thing, but there's just a commentary that says, "We shall mention no names." Oh, man. But between that, there's even like a bit where he talks about like dogs. He's like, man, I don't like dogs. People only like dogs because they're all of the shitty qualities of human, where they're subservient and weak and they piss on themselves. And it's like, I don't agree with him all the time, because I love dogs. But there's so much in here where it's like, he just, for a man who, at least in his work, he tried to stand by his ideas and not let his persona be the draw. This one, you do get to see a flavor of him, and he's kind of smarmy. He's kind of a prick, but he's charming. You know, it works very well. And like, you don't have to agree with him, especially when they talk about, he talks politics, or he talks about how he doesn't like dogs, whatever. And I know there's some things where apparently he leaned a little right wing as he got later in life and things like that. But just as a work, as a piece, this is a brilliant thing. And don't get me wrong, there's still quantum mechanics. This is where he talks about
we skipped over the magic sections because they read like this: null path enchantments in six-dimensional psi space time. Figure 1 below shows the 3 dimensions of time with a circle of unit radius in the plane of AB. Enchantments launched by a magician at T0 can act on the circle of the probabilities of T1 and may appear as changed conditions at T2 when the magician arrives at T2. Conversely, retroactive enchantment can have the odd effect of apparently altering T1 properties so long as these do not have the effect of preventing the enchantment. This can result in a change of conditions at T0. Clear as mud, right? And it's got a fucking diagram. It's got an actual fucking diagram of this shit. Here, we'll just read the commentary because it's right here. Enchantments thus land at a distance in the future twice as great as the radius of the circle of imaginary time probabilities with which they can interact. Retroactive enchantment acts on a circle of probabilities at T-1, not shown in Figure 1, which then feed back to the present at T0. As we can only observe the instant of the present in T, any debate about what really occurred at T-2 becomes academic. Arguably, Carroll, I think all of that was fucking academic and completely pointless, but I at least see what you're trying to tell me.
But if T squared minus the hypotenuse equals, what are you talking about, Tubbs?
And if you reverse the polarity of the neutron flow, yeah, dude, like, fuck this shit. I get it. It's ultimately like a metaphor. They weren't all winners.
Not only that, but he goes in, he talks about, I don't remember if he actually says neuro-linguistic programming or E prime, but he gives you an exercise that is basically E prime. Banish the word is from your conversation or from your written thought and see the way in which you use language affecting how you are consciously aware of phenomena, which Crowley did similar stuff.
Yeah.
It's a takeoff.
It's there.
I'm not going, oh, he just took it from Crowley, but I'm saying that that isn't in and of itself a new idea, and he didn't even come up with E prime, but he used it. So there's lots of stuff. And then, of course, we get to the practices, the takeoff of the chaos monasticism from Liber Chaos. We get the Chaos Cyberzoo, which is a similar enough process, but using a pentacle rather than the wand, and then the Jihad of Chaos, which is the dagger, and the Void of Chaos, which is the cup. Again, all different exercises that they're worth doing. At least one of them, maybe. It might be your thing. It might open something for you. And then he talks about spin warp theory. You see, time's got 3 dimensions, and every subatomic particle is actually the same particle, but it's a byproduct of a different color and rotation and speed of spin. And he theorizes that all the various spins in different directions somehow equal a net zero in the universe. Yeah? No, we're getting mean.
I'm awake. I'm here. So a particle, they spin. Yeah, it's,
What I will say is that, to use Gordon White again, R.I.P., Chaos Magick is a big airport, lots of people coming and going, nobody stays. He used that quote to say that often people will come into Chaos Magick and then they will find somewhere else to go. They will find the thing that really resonates and works with them. And I would submit that while I would never say that Carroll left Chaos Magick, it is not unfair to say that Carroll increasingly leans on, what did I call it? Speculative science and quantum mechanics.
Yeah, physics, essentially.
Physics to produce what amounts to metaphysical frameworks for how and why magic work that I don't find necessary or entertaining.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, because I would tell you, if you haven't read anything by Carroll at all, ever, if you don't even know who this guy is, just go read Cybermagick real quick.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's really good. I guarantee you will find something. You might disagree with a lot of, I know I disagree with a lot of what he wrote in here, but I loved every minute of it. Even when the spin warp stuff was going on, it's like, you know what? This is wild, and it's just showing a little bit of where this man's head was at the time and how this leads us into even more of his work. It shows the progression. And I will also I'll do one last little reading. It's the second to last chapter. 59, about the author. In parentheses, the publishers requested this. The author values ideas above personality and thus, for example, prefers to read science fiction rather than soap opera. The author experimented with mediocrity until the age of 25 and then decided that excellence offered better opportunities. The author still takes this view at 43 despite frequent exhaustion. The author chooses to maintain an antique and idiosyncratic code of chivalry, honor, and heroism in an era largely devoid of such things just for the antinomian fun of it. The author values uniqueness in an era of mass production and consumption, values self-made or at least handmade artifacts above all others. The author captained the magical pact of the Illuminates of Thanateros for a decade and derived immense satisfaction from the progress made in the theory and practice of magic during this period, but grew to despise the slavish imitation and treachery from which many mortals seek to advance themselves. Commentary: the author does not wish to burden others with the task of emulating the multiple eccentricities of his lifestyle, sexuality, dress, hairstyle, or manicure. We leave that to the Aleister Crowleys of the world. Thus, without photograph or style tips, we arrive at the end. You do have to have... you do have to admit a certain level of charm, especially the irony of somebody saying the valuing of ideas above personality. And you can't help it. It shines through, you know? He was probably, for those that did get the pleasure to know him, you know, he probably was a fun guy to have a drink or two with, I'm sure. And then you say something about, why the fuck you want to put math in the magic, Petey? And you let him go. Let him go off.
Yeah. There's a world where Peter Carroll didn't write another damn book after this. And that was like the last thing we got to hear from him.
There is. Well, he probably thought, I think he believed in like multi-world theory.
Oh, interesting. He does talk about that in the next one, I think. That's kind of the line for me, I think. That's where I divide up my my early Carroll and my old Carroll in my...
I think this is like the middle child. It's like Liber Null Psychonaut, Liber Chaos, then this, and then a lot more math.
Well, I think it's the longest gap in his writing is there, because Cybermagick gets released in 96, right? And then the Apophenion, our next book, doesn't get released until 2008.
Yeah.
10 plus years, 12 years. And we don't get a gap like that again until, in my estimation, at least, Carroll kind of stops writing the major works, because we have his two last works come after like a 9-year drought, but his two last works are decidedly different than everything we're talking about now, in that they're not really even full creations of Carroll.
So going to the rest of it, the Apophenion, a Chaos Magick paradigm.
I don't like it.
I don't have a lot of overwhelmingly negative things to say about it, but I think mostly it falls on a lot of, like, he talks, what are the broad strokes of the Apophenion?
The broad strokes of the Apophenion are yet another sort of build around of the sort of ideas that Carroll's already been talking about, built into a more coherent sort of whole, I suppose. The big points Carroll wants to labor through in this are about panpsychism, about the sort of what he calls meta dynamics, which it really amounts to more quantum mechanics, is what it is. It's just a lot of quantum mechanics type ideas.
He has the assertion of the multi-mind, which not only refers to the idea that there is not a singular I or me anywhere to be found. There's just a lot of processes that are going on about a human being. He decries even saying the idea that I don't know if consciousness is even a thing, because what we call mind is just a constant doing, a process, which he touches on in Psybermagick. And he also touches on the notion of the colonial being as far back as Liber Null. That goes into the notions of the lack of a essential self.
Yeah.
But he extends it to every process in the universe has something akin to a kind of mind. And that's where we get this panpsychism.
Yeah, this is it, for anyone that knows people like Whitehead, that's sort of what he's getting on. That he mentions Whitehead by name. Whitehead is also someone that loves him some math and quantum mechanics when he wants to. I suppose we should talk about where the title of it comes from.
Slapping a Scrabble set off a table?
No, it's an actual word. Apophenia means finding patterns or meanings where others don't. Feelings of revelation and ecstasis usually accompany it. It has some negative connotations in psychological terminology when it implies finding meaning or patterns where none exist, and some positive one when it implies finding something important, useful, or beautiful. It thus links creativity and psychosis, genius, and madness. A talent for apophenia frequently characterizes magicians, mystics, and occultists. At its best, it opens up new fields of human endeavor. It has close associations with pareidolia, the mistaking of pieces of rope for snakes, seeing goats, bulls, and virgins in the positions of stars and in the personalities of people, the constructions of unreasonable conspiracy theories, and the theology of sky fairies. Nevertheless, pareidolia plays its part in the development of art and religion. By convention, we tend to regard inspiration as female because of its association with the holistic right cerebral hemisphere brain activity rather than the left hemisphere linear thought. Apophenia does not always come when we call her. Sometimes she rejects our seductions and entreaties. Sometimes she calls when we're out of our heads. Sometimes not. Sometimes her mad sister pareidolia comes instead. Chaosm seeks to explore the inner riches to expand the inner mythos, the pantheon of power within. For decades, I pursued the mythos of Uranus, the magician identity that lay beyond the soap opera of the 7 classical motivations of sex, death, fear, desire, love, war, and ego. Lately, I have come to realize that I love apophenia, the female aspect of the Uranian current, above all else. And then it says Uranus/Uranus lies outside of the classical 7 planets and their fancifully attributed motivations, and thus provides a useful counterpoint to the normal solar ego or identity.
The irony of somebody who hates astrology, who found such a useful and quite frankly, beautiful little poetic within the planetary system.
Yeah, well, you notice even in the pareidolia section, he's talking slap on astrology.
Yeah. But it's also worth noting that we didn't talk about this, but there are things like the Uranus rite, which not only there's actually a recording you can find of him doing readings of the Uranus rite, like invocation, stuff like that, which is cool. There's also an astral, imaginative, essentially guided meditation recording of him where he takes you through this sort of mind temple where you can do all your little astral imaginal workings, which are kind of neat. That's a thing that it's still floating around the internet. You can find it. You can buy a copy if you're so inclined.
It's interesting because Carroll decided to take what was like essentially a kind of a blank spot in the Western tradition, because obviously Uranus gets discovered later, so does Neptune, Pluto, and in the contemporary age, these have all been incorporated into like the older systems, but they're not there to begin with. Even Crowley writes on, he calls it Herschel and Neptune, and sort of, tries to integrate them. In the Book of Thoth, he talks about how, there's actually this kind of weird little blank spot in the tarot if you look at it, and you could fill it with these 3 planets that we didn't know exist. Interesting. But
then Pluto's not a planet anymore, and then
no. Bring back Pluto.
Imagine if they kept the name Herschel, so now I did the Herschelian rights.
More football jokes to be made. But that being said, it's interesting because it's something that Carroll clearly finds very important. He takes it as the final point to bring his dualities all around, because he's very big on these dualities. He likes the 5 as a representation of the universe because of its dualities, and then the one thing outside of it. And he did the same thing with the planets, and then decided, well, you know what? This chaos star diagram will look pretty bitchin', and I got another planet. But seriously, it's a
even
good
in the colors of
counterpoint.
magic, he has the octarine color.
Yeah,
which is like the
Terry Pratchett color of magic. Yeah. Don't worry, we're gonna get on more Terry Pratchett in a bit too. But
I won't describe this book as more of the same. It's continuations of a lot of ideas. The hypersphere idea comes up, which I'll be honest with you, dear listeners, I don't. He has goes into his ideas outside of magic, where he begins really looking like Carroll was hard up against the Big Bang. He thought it was going to be disproven, and he was offering hypersphere as one of the ideas of like different models and ways to look at the universe that might offer an alternative to the Big Bang. It's worth noting that before we were recording, I saw Vice share an article that said Big Bang disproven, and it was some alternative theory that came up. And also Peter Carroll's last blog post before he passed said, I feel like I have a great shot at outliving the Big Bang theory. There's just a little bit of a wink there that I think you'd probably appreciate that little synchronistic thing. I'm not saying, the Big Bang's done, guys. I just meant
it's chopped.
It's chopped, as the kids say.
I think this work is where I see Carroll as sort of departing from what I thought was the important and good stuff in Chaos Magick. What he does a lot of here is creating further elaborations and breakdowns of the sort of ideas that, someone like you and I would say are out of place in Liber Null, even, that far back. All the things that we want to criticize Carroll for start coming more and more to the forefront. His ideas on ontology, he's got a process philosophy sort of idea. He wants everything to be a becoming, and there's no static self. He rails against being quite a bit in this. But also just his underlying sort of modern metaphysics. He's very big on subjectivity. He talks about it in very weird ways. Let me find the quote. All right, here we go. Right in the very beginning of the multi-mind section, he says, consciousness always has a subject other than itself. It always has a focus on some perceptual phenomenon or on some internal state or emotion or thought. Descartes proclaimed, I think, therefore I am. Other people may rely on consciousness of different phenomena to reassure themselves that they still exist, but toothache provides almost everyone with inarguable confirmation of their existence. We cannot, however, have content free of consciousness. It does not exist as a state of being. It consists as an activity, and this activity ceases under anesthesia or deep sleep.
Western man rediscovers the 3 modes of being.
Look again at Descartes' assertion of I think, therefore I am. The appearance of the word I twice gives the game away. Plainly, the 2 instances of I cannot refer to the same phenomena. Descartes must contain an I doing the thinking and an I observing the other one doing it. Any form of introspection implies a dialogue of some kind. Plainly, we should regard mind as a verb and as an activity of the brain, rather than as a thing which we have or consist of. Mind remains unobservable. It consists of a doing, not a state of being. We can only infer the presence of the activity of minding. Consciousness only occurs when it has a subject, so self-awareness can only consist of one part of the system having awareness of the activities of another part. However, we learn to assume that the same part always has consciousness of the rest. And he goes on about this for quite a while. He talks about philosophical zombies. He talks about construction of self as a social construct. He talks about repression and how the development of Freudian psychology comes from a version of man that was more socially repressed than it ever had before. It's all interesting sort of stuff. It's not really magic.
He branches off into maybe this is the third direction when we talk about he does a lot of cool things where he gives you these hands-on, like, here's things you should do or exercises you can take and work with, and they'll give you results. And then he talks about quantum-y physics and speculative science ideas that might explain why something, the way in which a magic ritual can somehow have the same effect as something physical happening in the world, that sort of thing. And then the third one is essentially philosophy. It's breaking into...
and it's a particular sort of psychological philosophy too. He's very grounded in, and I have a quote here I'll throw out once I'm done with this to prove my point. What Carroll becomes grounded in more than anything in this work, and it continues through the rest of his stuff, really, and even his thoughts later in life from what I've gathered, Carroll has a modern metaphysics. He is a science person. He thinks physics is how it is. He's got, for all intents and purposes, like a materialist understanding of the world that is then permeated with magic by sneaking it into quantum physics. And because of that, he tends to interpret all the spiritual sort of aspects of magic. He tends to interpret the experiential side of doing magic, all in this sort of almost an evolutionary psychology sort of way. He's perfectly fine with saying that the mind is not like a separate metaphysical thing. It's almost like, it's like he read Aristotle and and it's basically that. He's just like, yeah, like the mind comes out of matter because it's a doing, but like then you still get to do all the mindy stuff because mind is everywhere, panpsychism. It's this sort of smuggling of his ability to talk about subjectivity and the sort of need for a separate mind from the body in a phenomenological sort of sense, in a when we're doing it, it feels like we have a mind, and I think I have a mind, and I can act like I'm a mind doing mind stuff. But he wants to be able to sweep it under the rug, philosophically. That's what he does a lot of in this.
Yeah, well, and a lot of it comes down to almost the mind is just this process going on the same way that gravity is like a process that is just, it has to be out there and everywhere. It can't just be where I'm at.
Yeah, it's not a special privileged thing. It's not like a soul or something.
Yeah, which is, I don't even have that much pushback in it on those grounds, and we won't get into our particular philosophical bend about the necessity of embodiment and all of that, because we'll be here all night. But mostly it's him doubling down on sort of these ideas that he's already touched on quite thoroughly. It's just him almost paring down and trying to refine the process more and more. And I will say that I think even the title gives it away. It's like a Chaos Magick paradigm. He's just presenting like, here's a way to think about this, and here are things that you can do with this. I just don't know if I find them particularly that useful or that great. And
or that compelling.
And I think oddly enough, he does get very poetic here. He even mentions he talks about the contrasting of logos and mythos pretty early in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And magic as magic it being like sort of the experimental but mythic, the intentional constructing of personal mythos and that sort of thing. And I think stuff like that's cool. Yeah, that's great. And when he does get poetic, there's I think Phil Hines said it in an interview, but he talked about Carroll's viewing that the two types of people that like Chaos Magick are like the people that I I would say that are probably like, what he means is the people that are like me, that are the sort of scientific-minded rationalists that are open-minded enough to sort of see the validity of the magical process. And then there's I think the word he used was the anarcho-romantics.
That's a good word.
I would probably fit very firmly in the anarcho-romantic. But,
oh, yeah.
But Carroll's got plenty of that, even in this book, where he's going on about hypersphere. Where you see the universe
we didn't even
is
talk about the
unbounded.
hypersphere yet.
Well, I said I can't. Because it's like the universe is finite but unbounded, and time and space are rotating.
Yeah, and it's just like, what does this got to fucking do with me casting a spell? Here's the quote I was talking about. This is where I am reminded that what Carroll is doing is it's not a deficiency. It's not something that's wrong with him. That, he got Chaos Magick wrong. It's that the path he chose to pursue with it is something that I think was not a good idea or a necessary one. He's talking about in a section called On the Nature of Time. He's going through all these issues of time and so on and so forth. And he says, the whole idea of being thus seems illusory and to merely arise from our rather sluggish perception which fails to notice the ubiquity of change. The whole idea of the past and the future thus also seem illusory because no particle-like reality exists there at all. We learn to conjure an illusory picture of reality for ourselves in which we and other people and various phenomena have being and some sort of a real past and future from the perspective of the present. Without that illusion, we would probably find existence intolerable. The above paradigm represents general metadynamics taken to its logical conclusion. It provides a model of the physical principles underlying both quantum physics and magic. Yet I regard it as dark illumination, an unpleasant insight into how the machinery of the universe may actually work. I find it at least as disturbing as the idea of the inevitability of personal death. Yet, as a Chaoist, I must regard nothing as true, but regard some things as having greater or lesser degrees of utility. Thus, I will use it for magic as I find it the most convincing paradigm available, despite that I find it mystically unattractive. For the purposes of conducting my ordinary life, I shall use other less austere paradigms. That's what Carroll is about. That is why Carroll was so up on the quantum physics angles and this sort of ideas, the sort of psychological, panpsychic, at times almost materialist ideas that he would present through the final two works that he has after this. It's because he thought that was the most convincing and useful. I don't agree with him, but if that was truly the rationale he had, then Peter Carroll remains fundamentally the most chaotic of the chaotic, right?
Yeah, this medicine tastes bad, but it's going to do what it needs to do. He says, like, this is not... Maybe you could make the argument that it's like, oh, you just don't want to reckon with it because it's kind of materialist and doesn't lend itself well to good feeling or something like that. And I don't, my critiques of it aren't that, that's my problem.
Right.
It's like I find it as unpleasant as the inevitability of personal death. And it's like, well, yeah, that is definitely an unpleasant thing to reckon with, being towards death, as Heidegger said. But I don't find hypersphere to be unpleasant because I don't like the answer. I find it unpleasant because it seems unnecessary and dubious.
We haven't even really talked on the quality of Peter Carroll's thoughts on quantum mechanics, especially given the time he was writing in. There were a lot of...
I'm not going to get into that because...
Well, neither of us are qualified, really.
Yeah, neither of... I'm not... I will openly admit that Carroll probably understands the subject better than I do. But what I would say was that I don't need to be better at Carroll at quantum mechanics to know that he's fudging stuff.
Well, like we said, he's mixing his facts and his metaphors all over the place here. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, but it's
okay.
But that's 2008, and that's we're approaching. He's By this point, he is in his 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So moving on to what? The next book?
Yeah, the next book.
We're at 2010?
Yep, 2010.
Okay, real quick, hold on. So also notable as far as Carroll's personal, on January 11th, 2010, it was reported that Carroll was leaving USC to coach the Seattle Seahawks.
Oh my God, no. God, how did I let you get that one in? I'm the sports guy. I'm supposed to be making these damn jokes.
Caught you slipping.
The Octavo.
A sorcerer scientist grimoire.
Yeah. See, now Carroll thinks he's a scientist. We're not even going to go through all of this the same way we've gone through the other ones because I think it's a lot of repeating himself. This is kind of the most bold Carroll gets in a lot of ways, so I'm going to read this introduction just verbatim real quick. Every generation rewrites its theory and practice of magic. Chaos Magick updated the ancient occult art during the last 2 decades of the 20th century. It liberated magic from its dependency on religious symbolism and theological theories about deities and spirits by demonstrating that imaginary gods and spirits have exactly the same effect as the supposedly real ones. Thus, it initiated the reformulation of magical theory and practice in terms of some of the symbolisms of science, psychology, and parapsychology. Plus, its own idiosyncratic symbolism went down rather well with the late crop of hippies and then the punks. The 8-ray Chaos Star looks particularly catchy in chunky silver jewelry or in red paint on black leather. Today, a lot of them wear discreet octarus rings with a business suit. However, during periods of improved sanitation and reduced warfare, some generations even live long enough to try and re-rate magic 1.5 times. Thus, the old mage's Stochasticus, I can't even say his fucking name properly. It just seems, why would you pick that name? Stochasticus.
Because he likes quantum mechanics.
He sounds like a guy who works at a Greek restaurant. Stochasticos presents
Stochasticos, bring the spanakopita.
Stochasticos presents yet another thesis. This Octavo, perhaps his last after nearly 40 years spent slaving over a hot pentacle. So that would be a lie. Now reality imitates art because art explores the imagination and we create reality mainly through imagination. Paracelsus, Eliphas Levi, McGregor Mathers, Aleister Crowley, Austin Spare, and Michael Moorcock have all fed ideas into Chaos Magick. Plus, it made some acknowledgments to the ideas of quantum physics and other bits of strange science. Some acknowledgement, Carroll? Some? The new tradition has matured as it has absorbed other elements as well, and the time now seems ripe to add a further portion of physics because nobody with half a brain in the developed world really believes in religion anymore, plus some more Pratchett. Taoists have already appropriated Sir Terry Pratchett's concept of octarine, and they have found it to have such exceptional magical efficacy that they now scout his Discworld novels for further joys and metaphysical revelations. It will perhaps turn out that Pratchett's Discworld can tell us much about our world's magic as Edwin Abbott's Flatland told us about our higher dimensional geometry.
Invocation of the Hogfather.
Yeah, so it's what this book is all of the previous stuff, plus he's going to talk a lot more about Terry Pratchett, and yeah. And what was that? What was that, you listener? You said, hey, wait a minute. Where's all my math problems? Don't worry, because you have everything in this work is broken down into long form, like mathematical algebraic theory. It's the grimoire, the spells in algebraic form, and then he gives you all of them. There are, of course, 8, because this is the Octavo. It's spells of the binding, spells of the spinning, spells of illusion, spells of subtle magic, spells of the linking, spells of impractical magic, spell of practical magic, the spell of narration. Yeah, so it's interesting. It's kind of...
The tagline of this episode is going to be geeks that hate math. Stupid wizard geeks don't like their math problems. How are you guys nerds but not good at math?
Yeah, pretty much things that you would imagine. It's not anything crazy. Like, yeah, here's the spells of impractical magic after we get the formulas, and the spell and the anti-spell, both in a formula. In the Chaos view, magic works by influencing probability. Any event has a probability of occurrence somewhere between 1 for certainty and 0 for impossibility. Thus, a fair coin toss has a probability of 0.5 for coming up heads, and fairly thrown dice have a probability of about 0.16 of showing a 6. However, magicians tend to regard such odds as potentially improvable, and they tend to regard nothing as either completely certain, even though it may appear about 0.99999 or so, or as completely impossible either, although a 0.000001 probability do seem challenging to work with. Yeah. It's just him talking to you about probability, and he goes way too hard into it, trying to explain to you about how magic can affect probability. And it would be completely just a slog to get through. But he does, at least for the end of each one of them, give you a magical ritual to do. And we are big fans of saying, all right, now do a thing.
Yeah. What's the thing for, just an example, what's the thing he gives you at the end of Impractical Magic?
He gives you Magical Ritual Part 6, Chaometry. Choosing achievable objectives for the conjuration phase of a magical ritual involves careful consideration of the art of the possible. Any conjuration the magician seeks to encourage something to happen or to find out something previously unknown or uncertain. Enchantment and divination represent the distinct route to the exercise of the magical will or perception, but the magician may also use indirect methods such as invocation, evocation, or illumination, particularly in the pursuit of more complicated objectives. Again, we still have the 5 here. He hasn't gotten rid of that. He's not going to. In every case, the magician needs to consider the chaometry. Subtlety. Do the required changes lie within the energy, entropy, or informational indeterminacies of the system? Linkage. Does a reliable magical link exist? Practicality. Does the conjuration seem likely to achieve a useful distortion of probability? Considerations of practicality depend very much upon the amount of magic required. Chapter 7 discusses the requirements for making it available. However, chaometry considerations usually rule out most of the things that people fantasize about achieving by magic as simply impractical by direct enchantment or divination. That's Carroll telling you that you're not going to throw a fireball. Magicians therefore often elect to work towards an objective by the indirect methods of invocation, evocation, and illumination. A brief discussion of each of these terms of chaometry follows. Chapter 3 addresses invocation to some depth. Basically, invocation of some chimera, hate that, or god form follows the magician to enter gnosis more readily by providing a path of emotional egress into a previously established exalted state, or hyper-focused excitation or quiescence, as Chapter 7 explains. Secondly, it provides access to the previously established belief structures which help the magician overcome disbelief in the possibility of the desired outcome. Thirdly, the very act of invocation helps to delete a lot of contrary conscious mind chatter and allow the intention to reach the more powerful subconscious. Thus, in invocation, the magician uses sleight of mind tricks to overcome the normal conscious straitjacket mindset of our culture that denies the possibility of magic. Again, everything we've already sort of touched on here is just being represented in these sorts of 8 exercises and these 8 screeds of possibilities. It's fine enough. I wouldn't recommend it over Null.
I don't think I would. I think I did maybe just read Liber Chaos.
Yeah, legitimately, it's kind of like it's kind of his least impressive work because for no other reason, it is exactly what he said it is. It's like, hey, this is me doing what I already did again.
Yeah, and you can't fault him because if he thinks that if this is his idea of this is the most effective, this is the method that has the most utility, and this is the way of going about it, yeah, of course he's going to keep giving you math problems. Of course he's going to restate. It's like if Carroll showed up 5 years later and said, "Oi, guys, I was wrong the whole time. This is stupid." You'd be a little pissed. So it's like at least he is sticking to his guns, and he says well, this is what's worked for me. I've been doing this for decades now, and this is how I go about it. It's just perhaps just because it worked for Petey doesn't mean it's the best way. And he'd probably agree. He's like, this might not be the best way for everybody at all times, but this is what I think. This is what I'm going with.
Yeah. That's pretty much all there is to this. Well, there is one more thing we have to talk about, and we're not going to go too hard on it, but I just want to talk about it because he puts it here at the end of the book. This is Appendix 1, Chapter ? The Knights of Chaos.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. After a particularly long screed that says stuff like, the orthodox and canonical round-world Octavo grimoire cannot possibly have more than 8 chapters, and we do not particularly care for the number 9 anyway, so we must treat this as an appendix. He basically, he just says, like, look, I wanted to put this in here, but I can't.
It had to be 9.
It
had to be 8. It couldn't be 9, so we got to do like this is a bonus. It's like how it's like when people say it's 11 and another one because I don't fuck with 12.
He just kind of goes off about the stuff. He talks about chaos and Terry Pratchett novels, and he talks about the chaos in the Greek sense, and he talks about just all this stuff. I don't know if this is because this is the newer edition, but this is the one that he still is putting it in here as if it was part of the original book, so we're going to talk about it still. He talks about nothing is true, everything is permitted, and Nietzsche, and you're like, yeah, but what are we actually trying to get at here? What is this whole Knights of Chaos thing, right? And then we get to the next section, which is averting apocalypse.
Sounds like someone doesn't want to monetize the eschaton, but okay.
So yeah, he's still going off about chaos. He's talking about chaos and how the elder gods of sex and death and love and hate and fear and desire leak beneath the fragile veneer of our civilization. He's just kind of giving you a bit of a hey, chaos is fucking wild. It can do a whole lot of bad stuff. And then he starts talking about some things that are a little awkward. Stand over a hillside overlooking one of our huge cities and notice its fundamental instability. Any interruption to the endless food convoys streaming into it or to the megawatts of power and fuel flowing in spells disaster, as does the breakdown of its internal communications media. Modern cities lack the robustness of pre-modern towns, which could usually supply themselves from the surrounding countryside and restore command and control functions with a short walk or a talk. Our numbers and our consumption have reached levels that our technology cannot sustain for much longer. We have severely depleted our planet's fossil fuels to achieve such a level of population and consumption. We face catastrophic climate and ecological changes if we continue on our present course. We do not yet appear to have many viable alternatives to this apocalypse on the horizon. The world's richest nation now needs 10,000 gallons of oil to survive each and every single second. It has few plans to reduce that dependency, and most other nations now seek to emulate this behavior. We have already wrecked large areas of the planet's oceans, and our new unstable industrial farming techniques imperil the fertility of the land.
He's not wrong.
I mean, well, it's sort of, what's the fucking term for it?
Malthusian?
Yes, it's Malthusian. It's just like, Jesus, what are we supposed to do?
Get a sword, cut off somebody's head. Every person you kill is one less person.
Unless we evolve other plans. Whether we act or not, we seem to face an impending eschaton, a global change of planetary ecology and climate and human civilization. A slim chance exists that we can amenitize an agreeable eschaton rather than a vast historical reversal. It seems worth a try. Cue the entry of the 5th horse person, Chaos, who might just show us how to distort probability and arrest the landslide into entropy sufficiently to create a merry apocalypse. Instead, in which the impending apocalypse becomes but a mere myth which we have had the sense and inspiration to avert.
I know you're being kind of funny about it, but this is poetic. I kind of get where he's getting at. It's like he's looking at the situation. It's like maybe there's a way to get through this.
Yes, but the problem with that, my friend, is that what the Knights of Chaos became was like a group of magicians doing like magic stuff to save the planet.
Not a bad idea in and of itself, but
I know, I think it's a terrible idea. I wrote a whole article about why I think that you doing magic for political reasons is really fucking stupid.
You should do, you clearly you have to do other things, but
I know, and
his heart's in the right place.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to decry you for doing political magic. Y'all do what you got to do.
But we do remember the scree of of Knights of Chaos doing magic to turn Putin's people against him and stuff like that.
Yeah, we made the joke about Alexander Dugin standing on the Russian border and holding his hands up to put up a force field to stop all the curses of the Knights of Chaos.
Yeah, he just said he shot his auric blue egg that he learned to do from the Typhonian trilogies. But what's notable about it is that he focused in on Putin, and not that Putin's a good guy, but it's like, could you imagine if Knights of Chaos came out against like American imperialism? You know?
Well, I mean, the other thing to point out is that it didn't seem to work. Vladimir Putin has only gotten more powerful and influential since then.
Yeah.
That's not really a knock on Pete. I don't really know what he thought about it or what happened with any of that, but it's really interesting to see this whole thing of like, hey, how to do magic, and then, the world's fucked. We're all gonna die. You better fix it. Come on.
He's not
do
wrong.
my magic night of chaos ritual.
He's not wrong, though.
I mean, he's not wrong. That's the problem. Because if this was like all in his head, then it would be like, oh,
so
wow,
much
Pete's
worse.
crazy.
It's gotten so much worse.
It is. It's really bad. But there were Knights of Chaos, so clearly he didn't think this went through. It didn't work.
I guess not. Maybe there was a different equation for it.
That takes us to the last major work of Mr. Carroll, doesn't it?
It does. And that would be Epoch, the Esotericon and Portals of Chaos.
This is a
book.
Yeah, a book. But it's also not just a book, though, actually.
Yeah, it's a deck. It's like a card deck.
It's not a tarot deck, but it's a deck. I genuinely think that this one is where if we had to say that Carroll does stop doing Chaos Magic proper at some point, this is it. This is the one where Peter Carroll is no longer really telling you that everything is true and nothing is permitted. He's kind of giving you what is just a complete system where you can go and decide what everything is based on what he tells you.
Kind of in the way that Apophenion is a Chaos Magic paradigm, as in like this is something you can use within the framework of Chaos Magic.
Yeah. This is again, as I said before, right? This is Carroll taking all of those ideas that people like you and me would say, well, that's just an idea, Carroll. You don't really have to like do that for Chaos Magic. That's not something you got to put in there at all. And kind of says, well, that's the thing. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, we're doing this now. Worth noting that this was published through the Arcanorium College, which is an online, essentially correspondence sort of course thing, right?
It started as like a forum.
Yeah.
And it's kind of what it seems to be is it was Pete's attempt to try to do a Chaos Magic body of people in the online world, and it didn't really go so well, allegedly. Like the forum eventually kind of broke down into nothing, and Pete was still doing the Bachelor of Magic program that he was doing, but he was basically just doing it through email correspondence with people. Like, you do all the stuff and you got to report to me.
Yeah. But I mean, good on. He's a knowledgeable person. He's got a lot. By this point, he's firmly established as one of the old heads and like a great thinker, and everybody loves him. So yeah, and he was taking time out of his day to read, like, hey, I wrote a paper. Will you look at this? And he's like, yeah, it's good. Or no, this is trash.
Yeah, I'm not actually here to criticize that at all. We actually have a couple people that we talk to about that we'll bring up sort of after this, I think. But as far as the work goes itself, you got all the heavy hitters that we talked about before. He talks about elementary magic. He presents he calls it the Kabbala.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that we didn't touch on, but like, Liber Null, he presents he says, this is my Kabbalah, and he shows a Sephiroth-like diagram of like sensation and Kia and this, that, and the other. And then in the Apophenion, he has another sort of Kabbalistic diagram, Kabbalistic-esque diagram of like the multi-mind sort of progression thing. It's something that he does latch on to quite a bit, but everyone in Western tradition at some point is going to get around to some Kabbalah. So
yeah, we love us a diagram is what we like. We just love that's where I am. That's what I'm doing. I'm over here. But it's, stop me if you heard this one before. He gives you like a dense kind of breakdown of the history of magic, as it were. He talks about the development of paganry and monotheism and the way that sort of stuff works, and talks about Gnosticism and goes on about H.P. Lovecraft, and then he gives you a big old diagram and says some stuff about quantum mechanics here and there.
Yeah.
And then he goes more specifically into the ideas of cartomancy, because again, this work
accompanies
it accompanies a deck.
If you want your own copy, it's still for sale. It'll run you, the book and the deck together run you like somewhere in the $70 range.
And that's sort of what I mean when I'm saying that this work in particular is breaking away from what I at least see as Chaos Magic proper, and is just giving you like an interesting system to work in. It's still got a lot of influence from Chaos Magic. You know, it's not like he's not a Chaos Magician anymore. Now he's doing his own thing. No, it's a lot more densely defined, and it has to be, because he's presenting a deck that is supposed to have systematic use for both magic, divination, so on and so forth. And he wants to lay out a system or a world that is useful to you in that endeavor. And he breaks it down into 3 spheres, which is 3 different sections on, you know, the Kabbalah. First is the realm of the elements, the circle of imaginary forces. And he describes this as, you guessed it, here lie earth, air, fire, water, and aether as archetypes of the physical forces and associated spirits and servitors of the humoral personality traits and abilities, and the 5 basic magical operations of enchantment, divination, evocation, invocation, and illumination. Then we have planetary magic, the realm of the gods, the sphere of imaginary allies, which, again, here lie the 8, rather than the classical 7, planetary archetypes or archons, where each of these god forms represents one of the core emotional driving forces of the human psyche, and which create the human condition. And then, interesting, stellar magic, the realm of the elder gods, the hypersphere of imaginary adversaries. Here lie the archetypes of the higher knowledge and the powers to which the elements of humanity and many magicians aspire, despite the dangers that they bring with them. So, yeah.
It's interesting in a way that Chaos Magic begins as a breaking away from the dogmatic systems. No, you don't need to use the Kabbalah. That is an arbitrary guideline. That's just one thing you can use. Or you don't need to use the elements. Carroll's original descriptions of the magical weapons becomes so focused on like their functions that they don't even fit the typical understanding of ceremonial magic weaponry, right? They don't correspond to the elements. He doesn't talk about them in those terms. He talks about what they're used for and like what they could function with, right? And then over time, you know, with Cybermagic, he's describing things that are much more conventionally understood to be the thing that they are. And now he's using, not that he's using the elemental weapons in this, but I'm sure it factors in at some point because he's using the classical elements.
Oh no, yeah, no, they come in the elemental section,
go.
Yeah.
He's using the 4 classical elements. He's using the planetary systems along with accompanying god forms. He is very much in a way reclaiming the Western tradition after Chaos Magic does have a period of chucking everything out. It's almost a return. There's I think I remember somebody talking about like Chaos Magic having to reform because everybody got so crazy where they was like, oh yeah, we learned that you could invoke Superman as a solar deity, but then we all learned that using Apollo just worked better. And I don't agree with that. I really don't. I think it's easier to fall on historical and traditional motifs because it gives you a sense of legitimacy.
Yeah.
rather than just taking the practices and the methods and just doing stuff with them till you figure out what works. Instead, we'll get a little scared, and you're going to have to fall back on the stuff that Levy wrote about.
Yeah, you know.
I'm gonna just go talk to the salamanders.
I'm gonna go do some PGM. I know that works. Ugh. Fuck you. No, I know a lot of people that do good
Boo
PGM
this man!
stuff.
But he's presenting a more coherent system, a more streamlined in a way, perhaps. Basically, like, okay, these are the familiar things you might know about magic, or at least ideas that you've heard before, and let me put my coyote shtick with them.
Yeah, well, I mean, he sticks the quantum mechanics and physics on it. You know, water corresponds to space in physics. Fire corresponds to energy. Aether corresponds to the wave function, and it's like, okay, cool,
sure,
fine,
why not?
I guess,
why not?
But he also brings up Baphomet again.
Yep.
And everything we already said about Baphomet gets repeated. It's not really new. It's not really new in that sense, but it's definitely all of these ideas presented in their most fleshed out and coherent, because he has a whole section on aeonics again, which we're not going to go. We didn't even really talk about aeonics, but do we need to go read Liber Null about aeonics? It's not important to doing magic. It's really not.
It's not.
Yeah, it's just a thing. If you like Thelema, you're probably really into it, but you don't need it. What I think is interesting is that, and telling, is that the planetary magic section, he breaks down, the 8, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, and he gives the colors that he's been given the whole time. Octarine is there. And then he talks about how all of these gods have sort of a mixed capacity to them. And that's where the 36 planetary god forms follow from. And as you know, this is the deck we're talking about. So This is the stupidest thing I can come up with, and I'm sorry. Do you remember that Kirby game for the Nintendo 64?
Yeah, where you get one element and
you can get one power, and then you get another power. Yeah.
I got the cut power and the fire power, and now I got a giant flaming sword that I can throw at people, or I can slash up with it.
Yeah, I got the water and the rock one, so now I have like a boulder that flies around on like a water stream from my mouth or something.
I got the ice one and the electrical, and I became a fridge. It's actually one of them.
Well, and then that's what happens here. That's what he does.
Imagine if that was a god. Imagine if all the gods were like
imagine
that.
That's gods. And yeah, so I mean that's literally what he does here. And he does discuss that, like, they're not all, historically, these gods are not all, like, just this element and this element. He has a thing on Odin talking about how he's got aspects of Uranian quality and a Saturnine quality, but he also has some sort of aspects of Mercury because of the runes and a sort of martial quality. But he mentions, well, there are other gods in the pantheon that kind of exhibit them better, so for our purposes we're gonna put it here.
We'll use these.
Just give me a random combination and I'll tell you who it is.
Oh, perfect. Let me think, what is Mercury and Mars?
Mercury and Mars is Loki. Yeah, would you like me to go to the segment and read what he has to say about Loki?
Okay, I'm gonna say this first because Alan Moore's Serpent Bumper book, right? He's one of the ones that really spelled this out, where it was like it's a good metaphor, so that's why I'm using it. Other people have said this before, so but it's just he laid it out like in a really matter-of-fact way. Where he's like, all right, so when you're thinking about the pathways in the Tree of Life, and you look at the corresponding tarot cards, understand it's like if you just think about it in terms of what this sphere is traveling to that sphere. He uses the metaphor of like the hanged man. You say because the intellectual qualities of Hode, which is Mercury, when it meets the somewhat destructive and fiery qualities of Gabora, you're kind of just done. You're suspended. You're just you realize the inevitability of everything succumbing to entropy, that sort of thing, and that's represented perfectly by the hanged man.
Right.
I thought, I was like, hey, man, that's a really great, like a really straightforward way of putting that. So I want to hear Carroll's take. And then I'm thinking about, hey, what's the thing that Loki's big for? It's a hanged man.
Here we go, Loki. Oh, and by the way, you get art for all of these cards for these various figures. Loki kind of looks like, you seen that meme that's like, what's wrong, logger boy? You're afraid you're going to taste something? He's got like a long, I don't know. I don't want to be mean to the artist here because the artist probably put some really hard work into this, but this looks like AI before AI was prevalent. That's really mean. I'm sorry. You probably did really good. They probably look exactly like what Carroll wanted.
We're just being honest about our opinions. You can't. Pete would not want anything less of anybody.
In hard, violent times, psychopaths find their use. But their use often comes at a high cost. Odin swore blood brotherhood to Loki, and at times Loki assists the gods in various tasks. Yet Odin seems to allow Loki to sow malicious slander amongst the gods. Loki possesses a mercurial charisma that allows him to get away with this most of the time. He brags that he has seduced the wives of most of the other gods, and he seems to take the psychopath's narcissistic view of himself. Loki provides Odin with a magical octopedal steed, but Loki seems to have created it by shameful means involving perverted sex with a horse. All in all, it seems a grim and bloody nihilistic tale in which everyone and their sons end up slain. Well, that must have happened rather often when people win a Viking and the chieftains went a schemin'. Whilst some have attempted to interpret the Loki archetype more favorably as some sort of trickster god, the bear myths reveal him as a treacherous Machiavellian psychopath, liar, slanderer, and criminal. He appears as a character that you might feel tempted to appoint as a clever lieutenant in some seriously nasty enterprise, so long as you thought you could get rid of him afterwards. If not, you will pay a terrible price. Our image shows Loki with a switchblade in one hand, whilst dragging a venomous spider on a thread from the other. At his feet stands his son, the snarling Fenrir, wolf unleashed for violence. Psychopaths tend to create psychopathic sons. In the background, a Norse goddess lifts her skirts at the long hall, and the dragon-proud funeral longboat burns. Magicians may consider evoking Loki to familiarize themselves with the god form, although they should remain very wary of asking it, or its human avatars, for any favors. Magicians should only attempt the invocation of Loki in extreme situations, perhaps in support of some regrettably necessary scheme involving illegal or unethical acts, or perhaps for defense against them, or acceptance by any bad company that they have fallen into or entered into. The Norse mythology needs no theodicy. It has Loki, the bad man's god. And that's really cool. That a really
neat.
Cool thing. It's, again, this is a wonderful little system where you can kind of point out all of these different god aspects. You have the grounding in the elemental magic and the idea of Baphomet as this sort of, unifying biological life force sort of thing. It's interesting. You want to do another one? I'll make it not as long.
Oh, yeah. What's solar and Uranus? Because those are like the two. The solar is kind of what he views as the consistent ego structure, the persona, and then the Uranian being the magician personality.
An excellent choice. That would be Lucifer.
Oh, duh.
Yep. Makes perfect sense. And I'll tell you this much. None of these ones are really going to be things that surprise you. If you look at, the minute you hear them, you're like, oh, that makes sense. Satan has a long and complicated history. Originally, it seems that Yahweh appointed him to test people's faith by tempting them to doubt and disobedience, and then to act as their accuser if they failed the test. Yeah. So it's just kind of a thing about Lucifer and Satan and so on and so forth. Yeah. Let's go to what
He's the light bringer.
Yeah, I am the light bringer. All variety of Satanism subscribe to the core ideas of exploring forbidden knowledge and transgressing religiously derived social mores about sexual and ethical behavior. Our image shows Lucifer defiant against religious and cultural order. He crushes their symbols beneath his taloned feet. He bears a torch and a serpent for knowledge and wings for flight, but with artificed wings, not the wings of angels, for he will fly in his own terms in the skies or in the caves. Before him stands a grinning couple flaunting their nakedness, each contemptuously waving a fig leaf aloft, while in their other hands they hold apples plucked from the tree of knowledge. The tree already sprouts another apple for Eris to use later.
Neat.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You know what? One more.
All right.
You know what? What's a good? How about like a happy one? What would be like Venus and Jupiter? That should be fun times.
Oh wow, that's Juno Hera.
Oh, okay.
Again, kind of not surprising.
Yeah, makes sense.
The goddess of women's difficulties and difficult women. Juno looked after the women of Rome. In this role, she acquired perhaps the most complex and confusing attributes and myths of any deity. She appears at times as something of a harpy, a Hadrian, a virago, and a battle axe, and many of the things that men find difficult about women. Although she appears as the patron of marriage and motherhood, she has a lot of issues with the adultery of her husband Zeus/Jupiter and with his mistresses and with the resulting stepchildren. She also has issues with her own troublesome children, the unlovely but clever Vulcan, the aggressive Mars, the anarchistic Eris, not to mention her antipathy with her hopelessly macho stepson Hercules. Kids, how demanding and exasperating they can seem.
I wanted a happy one, man.
Yet, despite her resonance with the realities of life, Juno has attracted rather less neo-pagan attention than many of her flashier sister goddesses, for both women and men often seek impossible culturally conditioned ideals rather than explore the sanctity of reality on offer. Our image shows Juno as a woman of indeterminate middle years, of a certain age, as they say. She appears majestic and somewhat solemn, crowned for her power and elegantly robed, for she feels no need to flaunt herself cheaply. In one hand, she holds a pomegranate, a fruit which reflects her own complex inner structure of many layers. She's like an onion. She's got many layers.
Like the king of Troy.
In her other hand, she holds a battle axe symbolizing her determination to get what she wants. She stands flanked by the creatures sacred to her, the cow for the sacrifices of motherhood and the somewhat despised ideas of docility and domesticity, the peacock for pride, injured or intact, and the lioness for her powers and ambitions. Invoke Juno for the power to deal with the issues arising from membership of the distaff side, the awkward squad, the half of the species that the other half so frequently finds it difficult to deal with. That exasperated other half may well consider invoking Juno for understanding and to court her favors.
It's neat. Yeah, it's a neat thing.
You didn't pick any of the weird ones, so I'll read some of the weird ones for you. Like, because all the popular ones are there, right? Odin, Osiris, Kali, Anubis, Hecate. Choronzon is Martial and Saturnine.
That kind of makes sense.
Baron Samedi is Solar and Saturnine.
Okay, Happy Death.
Bob Legba is Mercurial and Solar.
Mercurial and Solar. No, okay, I can kind of see that, I guess.
Yeah. Paradolia is Lunar and Mercurial, which makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you like to take a guess what Apophenia is? You already know it's a Uranian one.
Is it Uranian and Mercurial?
No, it's Venusian and Uranian.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Thoth
sure.
is Mercurial and Uranian.
Oh, no, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Eris is Martial and Venusian.
Right. Strife.
Again, kind of an interesting list, and again, as part of a oracle deck, as it were, this would be really interesting. Again, I'm not a big fan of the art for any of them, but the designs are cool, and Carroll talks about them in a useful way.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Like it's kind of it's almost an end cap to a long storied career where it's like it's more of a hey, here's something you can fuck with at least.
Yeah, of course, that is not the end cap of this book. The final segment is on stellar magic, and it's markedly different than the previous two, which were very nicely laid out. This is 4 parts, and it's stellar magic towards a 5th Aeon paradigm. Then it is a prologue, then a commentary, and then we are shown what this is really about. Because the prologue and the commentary are all of a certain book that we know quite well. In a way, this is a roundabout for us too, because we were talking about Kenneth Grant before this. In the very first special, we talked about the Necronomicon. I'm gonna read from this introduction here because it simultaneously touches on what we're talking about here, and it also will reveal part of why we at CMN kind of are at a different ends of the spectrum than Carroll, as much as we see ourselves as coyotes. Scientific illuminations of the last several centuries have brought the essentialist doctrines of religion and traditional esoterics into severe question. Ideas about the various essences, such as soul, spirits, life force, self, deities, and indeed the whole idea of Platonic-style forms and archetypes underlying or controlling material reality has become redundant from a scientific point of view. However, many people still casually structure their thinking along such lines. And most esotericists, occultists, and magicians still adhere to it as a matter of principle. The rejection of essentialism leads generally towards various forms of existentialism, as exemplified in philosophy by Kierkegaard, Heidegger, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, Sartre, de Beauvoir, and Camus. Existentialism proceeds from the idea that existence precedes essence. We should thus define ourselves and other people and phenomena in general by what they actually do. The supposition of an underlying essence of being has no validity. In the absence of supernatural origins for meaning, existence has no meaning beyond what we give to it. Although this can lead to angst, nihilism, despair, and a sense of absurdity or ultimate pointlessness, we nevertheless have the freedom to choose our meanings and choice of meanings. And choice of meaning rather than rationality actually guides our actions. Lovecraft's existentialism goes further into what we call cosmicism. Cosmicism corresponds to existentialism with a cosmological perspective. We inhabit an awesomely huge universe, billions of cubic light years in extent, consisting mainly of a freezing, radiation-blasted vacuum peppered sparsely with dots of white-hot hydrogen. An asteroid or a stellar explosion could obliterate life on Earth at any time. No benevolent deity will attempt to stop us if we try to kill ourselves or our entire race, for no such thing exists. The universe remains completely indifferent to the fate of our insignificant little species. Religion merely projects our own mental idolatries onto the vast cosmos and largely inhibits scientific, social, and political progress. The universe undoubtedly contains intelligences, but their purpose remains inscrutable and incomprehensible to us. Intelligences in the universe remain indifferent rather than malevolent towards humanity, yet they pose a great danger to us, for our search for knowledge may easily end in disaster, but that means absolutely nothing to the vast, uncaring universe. A vast gulf thus appears to separate the existential cosmicist exemplified by Lovecraft from the esoteric essentialism of conventional occultism. Yet if we add a third ingredient, the gulf become bridgeable. That should be becomes. There's a typo in this. The gulf become bridgeable. I'm sure that's got to be a scanning error, right? Yet if we add a third ingredient, the gulf becomes bridgeable, making existentialism and essentialism into a complementary duality, rather like the particle-wave duality. Quantum etherics can supply that ingredient. If all existing phenomena have an associated quantum wave function, which we can identify with the traditional idea of aether, then the wave function represents the essence of such phenomena. Yet if existence and essence form a complementary pair, then something fundamental changes in the esoteric paradigm. Essence and existence only occur together. Do not expect to find essences or archetypal forms or souls or spirits or even god forms floating around in the aether if no corresponding physical existence occur elsewhere. Thoughts quite obviously consist of physical existences, brain states. If you destroy a physical existence, its essence disappears as well. Similarly, if you create a physical form, you make its essence as well. However, this does not make essences a redundant concept, because essences can have non-local magical effects. Thus, looking again at our tree of life and death, we can see that its domains consist of the existences and essences of natural phenomena and our thoughts about them at the bottom. In the middle, we find the gods and goddesses that we make by our thoughts and actions on this planet. And at the top, we find not the prime mover, not the monotheistic God or limitless light or spiritual salvation, but a challenging and threatening darkness with dangerous knowledge loose in it. The knowledge of the elder gods. With that knowledge, we could follow those alien races that have achieved the creation of life and any desired degree of immortality, complete control over their own sentience, the ability to move freely in time and space, and complete control over the creation of mass and energy, or we could destroy ourselves with such knowledge. However, without such knowledge, our species and Earth life in general will have but a short lifespan in the cosmic scheme of things. Elemental magic deals largely with the natural world here on Earth, and planetary magic deals largely with the human condition, but stellar magic addresses the possibility of the transhuman condition.
Un cyborg.
Un cyborg? Yeah, I mean, just so many problems with that. It makes my head hurt.
Like, so much more metaphysics.
It's not even wrong, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
we've gone from a remarkable uniformity of method. We've gone from stripping away the unnecessary elements. We've gone from practical results-based magic to, all right, check it out. There's like 3 different realms, right? And like, it's all about quantum mechanics, by the way. Let me explain it to you. But like down here, you got like the earth shit. And then up here, you got like your brain psychic shit. And then up here,
there's
you
Cthulhu.
have and then the Cthulhu's over here. And it's just, you know, who is this for? Really? Like, who is this for?
It's an odd. It's an odd.
It's like he wrote a Necronomicon thing, and then instead of coming up with like the end of his book, he just wrote the Necronomicon part. Because like he's even got like this part here where he's just talking about what was it? Over a quarter of a century ago, the first Chaos Magick book, Liber Null, Book 0, appeared. The first spell in that book read, I wish to obtain the Necronomicon. It seems at the time a suitably vague and fanciful example used simply to illustrate the Austin Osman Spare method of sigil construction, and which used the word Necronomicon merely to represent the idea of some great lost legendary mythical grimoire as alluded to by H.P. Lovecraft. And then he shares the little diagram of I wish to obtain the Necronomicon, where he makes a sigil out of it. And he says, now nearly 30 years later, it seems that the 50,000 copies of that spell in existence have inadvertently and subconsciously conjured long, as Chaos Magick theory actually recommends. The Necronomicon idea has kept hovering in and out of conscious awareness over the decades, but it repeatedly became dismissed as impossible to do in principle because the source material seemed vague or self-contradictory in many places and filtered through a veil of dream and gothic horror fantasy. Necronomica have come and gone with little effect on serious esoteric thinking, except perhaps to inject humorous unease or uncertainty in the transcendental assumptions of the New Age paradigm. And then he goes on to essentially describe this Necronomicon, and he breaks down the different knowledges of the Lovecraftian Elder One entities, right?
Right.
You know, the Nyarlathotep knowledge arising from a hint of knowledge above, Cthulhu knowledge, how to meddle with the mind/brain directly, Shub-Niggurath knowledge, how to meddle with biology and evolution to create designed life, Hastur knowledge, how to meddle with entropy and negentropy, Yog-Sothoth knowledge, how to meddle with the space-time geometry directly to utilize whatever forms of teleportation, time travel, or interstellar travel that the laws of physics actually permit at their extreme limits. And Azathoth knowledge, how to meddle directly in the inner mass energy geometry of the universe, unleashing the immense creative and destructive powers of the nanoscale and subnuclear forces lurking with the center of all atoms and substances.
I mean, that all sounds kind of neat. Like, it's not like it's a neat idea. It's very Kenneth Grant. It's very Bertio, Trans-Yugothian currents and universe B, going through the crack inside Doth and getting to the side of where non-being comes into manifestation. Like, these aren't that the concept of the Lovecraft pastiche is not a new idea. The way he's working with it seems a little interesting, if not a tad out of pocket.
Yeah, and then he gives you like all the preparatory stuff of what you're going to need to do this, and then he just gives you the Necronomicon.
Yeah,
and he talks about how at a certain point that you'll get your own Necronomicon, yada yada, and it's a living morphing text and stuff, but it's just a grimoire. It's just a grimoire of doing spooky
Lovecraft magic.
Yeah, and he got it from doing the Lovecraft stuff.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, not a bad idea. But what this book is essentially a Russian nesting doll of the methodology of Chaos Magick, and now Carroll has kept nesting, putting this inside of this. We're now, we're 5 dolls in, where it's the Necronomicon inside of this other system thing that he's talking about, that's inside of this big quantum mechanics bugaboo, that's inside of the stuff that he was already writing about, the very basic things of Chaos Magick.
What's inside of a deck.
Yeah, that's inside of a deck too. Because
all these are also cards.
Yeah. So like I said, this is just a Russian nesting doll thing, which is fine. It's not like I'm not faulting him for that. It's just it's interesting to see where we've landed, like where we got to in the end of all of this.
Yeah. And it's, again, as like a full coherent kind of system, there are worse ones you could play with.
Yeah. This seems neat. Like I said, if you can, listener, you can buy this. If you want to fuck around with it, go for it. It sounds neat, but
we're a long ways from
where we started.
I just wanted to get away from like spooky metaphysics and nonsense and just do magic that works.
Yeah, focus, the technique-oriented results-based magic.
Yeah. And now we're talking about Lovecraft again.
You got to get your own Necronomicon.
And that's Carroll's last major magical work.
Yeah. The only two books that exist after this that have the Peter J. Carroll name attached to it would be the 2022 Interview with a Wizard, which in the early episodes of Chaos Magick News, we would look at a couple of the questions, hear Carroll's answers, give our answers, talk about what we thought. It's neat. It's just a series of interview questions done by email by Ian Blumberg N. It's cool. It's a neat thing. It's more of it's probably maybe a little closer to Cybermagick, and it's just Carroll gets to riff on ideas. It's fine. And then finally, his last work while he was alive was This is Chaos, Embracing the Future of Magic, which is a collection of essays, a couple from Carroll and a couple from a few other people, including friend of the show, Captain Mavis. Hope she's doing well. She's in the book as Mariana Pinzon. Yeah, it's like in that book, we even got an advanced a review copy, and it was cool to get that. You felt like the big time for a little bit, and it's fine. It's fine. I know leading up to his death, there was interest in a second Chaos anthology that will probably, hopefully, still come out. And Chaos Magick marches on, I suppose. We do have something from a couple of our Discord peeps, from Corey Ephesian, who's just a really cool person, for real. I'm glad they took the time to give a little bit. I asked them about their experience, and about once every 2 weeks, I'd email him with updates on my magic workings and theories as a member of the college. We discussed those in depth. He gave me a lot of good advice and some reality checks about my progress and views. I appreciated that. Otherwise, I'd write a longer, more academic piece every few months to summarize my progress thus far. My goal was to put out a series of those as a thesis to articulate my magic system and technique. We didn't follow the syllabus too closely, as I'd technically done most of it. So for me, it was more about refinement and articulating what I was doing. He seemed genuinely happy with some of my work, and that meant a lot to me. He did mention that he didn't actually reach the graduation point, as it were, because of his passing.
Well, there weren't many of them.
Yeah, well, because he sadly passed away. Last thing I'll say on my experience with the Arcanorium is that I'm simply saddened I didn't have more, and that I actually have very little to say from personal experience. I only met Carroll at the very end of his life, and I'm only one of many, many occultists he impacted. I'm grieving the loss and thankful for what little time we shared together. I feel like I knew him better than I really did because I studied his books and practiced his system thoroughly, but that's no replacement for personal interaction.
I reached out to another friend of the show, their Page of Words. I asked them for just some thoughts on their experience with it and so on. They said, I joined the AC after he had already basically dismantled it once already. We mentioned this. It was a whole online web school for a while. You can find it on the Wayback Machine. In his blog, he talks about an aversion to internet-itis. So my experience was just a free-form email exchange with the man himself. He provided a concise syllabus, and I basically self-directed my education, sending him regular reports. His responses were simple and helpful, targeted and specific. He wanted nothing to do with the IoT and advised against involvement, but he was usually moderate in his expectations. And I was given a quote. Carroll was quoted as saying, I know very little about the current activities of the IoT. I do not feel encouraged by the little that I have heard. But you may get lucky. Active and creative groups within it seem to come and go. Page went on to say he mentioned in his blog that he had become perhaps less permissive about what he thought magic could do, and his syllabus only referenced very specific chapters of his early books, not the whole thing. I got the impression he saw nothing is true, everything is permitted, had run wild, and was now kind of disappointed in the Chaos Magick community as a whole. But that's speculation. I really like the old man version of him a lot more than the occult cowboy version of him that I saw in Liber Null.
I disagree. Yeehaw.
He grounded me on a lot of stuff at a time when I was really open, vulnerable to new ideas. That was really helpful. He encouraged some of my ideas and gently discouraged others, but never felt the need to wield authority of any kind. After the last couple months of hearing about the worst of occult instructors and being reminded ever so much of the con game that's involved in a lot of this sort of stuff. It's nice to hear people with positive experiences.
And he was doing this for free too. He wasn't even taking $5 a month.
Oh, well, he's just stupid then. But yeah, it's I guess this is the point where we just, lay it on the table and say what we think of Carroll as a whole, right?
Yeah, I suppose so.
I mean, if we haven't said it enough, but
occultism is a little bit sadder for his passing, is what I'll say. I have just as much I disagree with him about as I agree with him, but were he not there in the first place, this show wouldn't exist. You probably wouldn't be listening. And the ideas that I do carry around with me as far as what I think magic is really about and what I think chaos magic really needs to move forward, and really just how to do magic in a way that is conducive to a proper, effective, healthy practice. It all comes out of the influence that I got from seeing this man's books.
The most important ideas of chaos magic for me are all things that Carroll saw very clearly in one way or another. Even in his later work, he's still touching on very important things that we need to remember. While I ultimately don't agree with him on a lot of things that can come down to what he saw as utility in a paradigm, and things that I at least believe were much deeper metaphysical arguments to be making. I think that Carroll is undeniably, he's the guy. That's why he's the man. This is where this comes from. Whenever I hear people talking about chaos magic starting with Austin Osman Spare, I'm always taken aback by it, because Spare's not what we have become. And even with our faults, we are what Carroll set us up to be in many, many ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our gratitude is unending to you, Pete. Wherever you have gone and shulked off this mortal form, we just want you to know that we can't thank you enough for what you did. Even if I'm not going to learn math.
I knew it was coming. We sincerely hope you have enjoyed this dive through Carroll's work. Hopefully you have not punched your screen in frustration because we said that we didn't want to do equations. You didn't like hypersphere? How are you guys such dorks and you don't understand an equation?
Look, I don't like time cube. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
stupid.
Hypersphere versus time cube. Look, when I figured out when you die, you actually end up torn between the Saturnian time cube and the Uranian hypersphere. And that's why you gotta implant your Kia into your kid and get back onto the samsara cycle.
You use the dim mock to slay your child, and then you put your Kia inside of them. That way you can grow up to be a Uranian big boy
and get the Necronomicon.
And you can get the Necronomicon so you can activate the matter energy geometry to blow yourself up. It's all just a bit silly, isn't it?
Man, I'm so glad I jerked off to a sigil for this.
Oh, man. Well,
with all of that said,
this has been Chaos Magic News.
The only Chaos Magic podcast left. If you wanted to watch someone else, tough.
You can't.
Instead, you got to go to chaosmagicnews.com, where you're going to find even more episodes. And you'll possibly find links to our interview series, an occasional article for your perusal. If you haven't gotten enough of this, we're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on RSS. You can come talk to us in the Chaos Magick News Discord.
You can tell us how stupid we are and how you can't just do math. What's wrong with you?
You can't do math and you can't do magic. You can call us big sweaty nerds or whatever the hell you want to do because we didn't like Time Cube Hypersphere. And you didn't think the Octavo was the great. What do you mean you're not in the Knights of Chaos?
If you want to see us on social media, where we sometimes post a spicy meme and sometimes give our horrible hot takes that make people yell at us.
Yeah, to trick you into engaging with us. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Chaos Magick News. We are on Blue Sky at CMN Pod. If you listened to this and you were like, wow, this was actually good, I want more. In fact, I want to support you guys because you're so cool, even though you clearly failed your remedial algebra. For just a crisp $5 bill a month, you can sign up for the Chaos Magick News Patreon, where you will get access to exclusive bonus content. Like we mentioned, we are doing the revisiting of Liber Null. We also do watch-alongs for things like old Satanic Panic videos, and we just different stuff. We talk about chi balls, and
we did a whole occult iceberg.
Yeah, lots of goofy stuff that you can just have a fun time with too. And also, you get a heartfelt thanks right here.
Thank you, Liz, I guess. Thank you, Cios93. Thank you, Pope Loki Satyr the 23rd LLC. Thank you, Obsbleck. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Acolyte One of the Ice Magic Meditation Society. We see that name this week. Thank you, Curse T. Thank you, Fyodor Krasny. Thank you, Tent Athena. Thank you, Tremov. Thank you, Tangy Darling. Thank you, DD Destruction. Thank you, Toziel Obscurus. Thank you, Lavender Ghost. Thank you, Tommy Kelly. Thank you, Clodius. Thank you, Cyrenex Flux. Thank you, Eric the Wizard. Thank you, Marcio Mendoza. Thank you, Archaic. Thank you, Sneaky Llama. Thank you, Malius. Thank you, Coffin Emoji, Sparkle Emoji. Thank you, Mother Hysteria. Thank you, Rowan of Birch Groves. Thank you, me. Thank you, Inko. Thank you, the Frog from Chrono Trigger. Thank you, Fast Eddie 666. Thank you, Benny Adeline. Thank you, Lapzod. Thank you, Flint Dibble. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Helicon. Thank you, Endocrine Bandit. Thank you, Ayatollah AGP93. Thank you, Aramol. Thank you, Salab. Thank you, J. Eric Murphy. Thank you, Alicia Shaw. Thank you, Serena St. Sinclair. Thank you, Agatha, not Agatha. And thank you, Xavier.
Much like the universe itself, that list is finite but unbounded. And we are forever grateful for your support.
Our gratitude to Carroll goes alongside our gratitude for you for supporting us.
And honestly, even if you're not a Patreon supporter and you've listened this far, I would kiss you on the mouth, with your consent.
Yeah.
With that, would you like the last word?
Oh, wow. I never get the last word. I think I want to give Pete the last word. This is from the commentary of Heresy 9. You can make money out of it easily. You can get people into bed with it sometimes, but otherwise, forget it. Thanks, Pete. All right, everyone. We will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking for a particular sort of thing here.
I'm going to cast a magic spell on Vladimir Putin that's going to make him poop himself.